What happens when a billionaire CEO's carefully controlled world collides with a woman who sees right through his walls when 3-year-old Lila asks why Miss Grace disappeared? Her father, Daniel Pierce, one of the city's most powerful men, realizes that all his wealth means nothing if he can't protect the hearts that matter most. This is the story of a blind date that changed everything. A little girl who became a matchmaker and 2 broken souls who discovered that sometimes the most unexpected love is the one worth fighting for. Stay with me until the end and let me know in the comments what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Pierce Industries' 42nd floor, each droplet racing down the glass like tears against the Seattle skyline. Daniel Pierce stood motionless behind his mahogany desk, his steel-gray eyes reflecting the storm outside as much as the one brewing within. At 34, he commanded a business empire worth billions, yet tonight he felt like a man drowning in his own success. "Daddy, why do you look angry at the rain?" The innocent voice cut through his brooding like sunlight through storm clouds. Daniel turned to find his 3-year-old daughter Lila perched in the oversized leather chair beside his desk, her tiny legs swinging as she clutched her worn panda stuffed animal. Her dark curls, so much like her mother's, framed a face that held all the wonder Daniel had forgotten existed in the world. "I'm not angry, sweetheart," he said, his voice softening in a way reserved only for her. "Just thinking about Mommy." The question hit him like a physical blow. Even now, 2 years after Sarah's death, Lila's casual mentions of her mother could bring him to his knees. He'd built walls so high around his heart that sometimes he wondered if he'd trapped himself inside them. "Sometimes," he admitted, kneeling beside her chair. "Do you miss her?" Lila considered this with the profound seriousness only children possessed. "I miss her hugs, but Mrs. Chen gives good hugs too, and so do you when you're not too busy being important." Before Daniel could respond to that devastating observation, his office door burst open. Ethan Rodriguez, his best friend since college, and the only person brave enough to enter without knocking, stood in the doorway, looking like he'd run up 42 flights of stairs. "Daniel, thank God you're still here. I need the biggest favor of my life." "Uncle Ethan!" Lila squealed, launching herself from the chair into Ethan's arms. "Daddy's been staring at the rain like it did something bad." Ethan caught her easily spinning her around as she giggled. "Well, sometimes rain can be very misbehaved. Speaking of misbehaved," he shot Daniel a desperate look over Lila's head. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "What did you do now?" "Remember Miranda, the woman I've been seeing for 3 months. The one you claim is the one every week until you find something wrong with her. That's the one. Well, tonight's the night I was supposed to meet her best friend. You know, the whole approval dinner thing. Except I just got called to emergency surgery. Mrs. Patterson's appendix decided to rupture at the worst possible moment." Daniel was already shaking his head before Ethan finished. "No, absolutely not. You haven't even heard what I'm asking. You want me to go on a blind date with Miranda's friend? The answer is no." Ethan set Lila down gently, his expression turning serious. "Daniel, you haven't been on a date since Sarah. That was 2 years ago. Because I don't want to date anyone. I have Lila. I have work. That's enough." "Is it?" Ethan gestured toward the rain-streaked windows. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're slowly disappearing into this tower of yours, and one day Lila's going to look around and realize her dad became a ghost." The words stung because they carried truth. Daniel had noticed it himself, the way conversations felt forced, the way laughter seemed like a foreign language, the way he moved through his days like an actor playing a role he'd forgotten how to feel. "Daddy." Lila tugged on his tailored pants. "What's a blind date?" Ethan grinned, sensing an opening. "It's when you meet someone new and exciting, princess. Like making a new friend, but for grown-ups." "Daddy should make new friends," Lila declared with the certainty only children possessed. "He only talks to work people, and they're boring." "See?" Ethan spread his hands. "Even Lila thinks you need to get out more." Daniel looked down at his daughter, at the hope shining in her eyes, and felt his carefully constructed arguments crumbling. Since Sarah's death, he'd focused entirely on being the perfect father, the perfect CEO, the perfect widower who had everything under control. But perfect was exhausting, and lately he'd begun to wonder if he was failing at all three. "One dinner," he said finally, the words feeling strange on his tongue. "And I'm bringing Lila." Ethan's face lit up. "Really? That's perfect, actually. Grace loves kids. She works at a children's center downtown." Grace Moore. Well, you'll see. She's different from the usual social circle. Miranda met her at some volunteer thing." Ethan paused, studying Daniel's expression. "Is that going to be a problem?" Daniel considered this. Most of the women in his social circle were cut from the same cloth. Beautiful, ambitious, with carefully calculated interest in his wealth and status. The idea of meeting someone outside that world was both intriguing and terrifying. "Where are we meeting?" "Bella Luna, that little Italian place in Pioneer Square. 7:30. Ethan checked his watch. "Which gives you exactly 45 minutes to go home, change into something that doesn't scream, 'I own half of downtown,' and mentally prepare yourself for the possibility of actual human connection." Daniel shot him a dark look. "I connect with humans. Lila doesn't count. She's contractually obligated to love you. I love Daddy because he reads me stories and makes funny voices." Lila interjected, apparently deciding the adults needed clarification. "Not because of contracts. I don't know what those are." Despite everything, Daniel found himself smiling, a real smile, not the practiced one he wore for board meetings. "All right, one dinner. But if this is some elaborate setup to get me back into dating, it's not." Ethan held up his hands in surrender. "I'm just trying to save my relationship, and maybe possibly remind my best friend that there's a world outside this office where people laugh and share meals and don't discuss quarterly earnings over breakfast." An hour later, Daniel found himself standing outside Bella Luna, with Lila's small hand in his, wondering how he'd let Ethan talk him into this. He'd changed from his business suit into dark jeans and a charcoal sweater, his version of casual, though he suspected it still looked expensive. Lila wore her favorite dress, the purple one with tiny flowers that Sarah had bought for her first birthday. "Daddy, you're squeezing my hand too tight," Lila observed. He immediately loosened his grip. "Sorry, sweetheart. Are you excited about dinner? Will there be spaghetti? Probably." "Then yes." Her logic was beautifully simple. "Daddy, why are you nervous? Your face looks funny." Before he could answer, a commotion erupted near the curb. A taxi had pulled up and raised voices carried through the evening air. Daniel's protective instincts kicked in automatically as he guided Lila closer to the restaurant's entrance, but the scene unfolding made him pause. A young woman stood beside the taxi's open door, her posture radiating quiet dignity, despite the driver's increasingly aggressive tone. She wore a simple blue dress that had clearly seen better days, her light brown hair falling in soft waves around her shoulders. There was something about her, a grace in the way she held herself, a calm strength in her voice, as she responded to the driver's demands. "I told you the card reader said approved," she was saying, her voice steady but touched with exhaustion. "I don't have cash, but I can show you the transaction on my phone. Lady, I don't care what your phone says. My machine says declined. Either you pay cash or I'm calling the cops. Daniel watched as the woman's shoulders sagged slightly, the weight of the situation settling over her. She glanced toward the restaurant, and for a moment, her carefully maintained composure cracked. He caught a glimpse of something raw and vulnerable, a woman who was clearly struggling but refusing to break. Daddy, Lila whispered, tugging on his hand, that man is being mean to the lady. She was right. And Daniel had spent 2 years teaching his daughter about kindness, about standing up for people who needed help. He couldn't very well ignore his own lessons now. Stay right here, sweetheart, he said, settling Lila safely beside the restaurant's door. I'll be right back. He approached the taxi with the confident stride that had served him well in countless boardroom negotiations. Excuse me, is there a problem here? The driver, a heavy-set man with suspicious eyes, looked Daniel up and down, clearly calculating his net worth based on his appearance. No problem, sir. Just a customer who can't pay her fare. I can pay, the woman said quietly, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment. There's just some confusion with the card reader. Daniel pulled out his wallet, extracting 2 $20 bills. How much is the fare? $18.50, the driver said, his tone immediately becoming more respectful. Keep the change. Daniel handed over the money, then turned to the woman. There you go, crisis averted. She stared at him, her eyes a warm hazel that reminded him of autumn leaves wide with surprise. You didn't have to do that. I can pay you back. Don't worry about it. Daniel found himself oddly reluctant to end the conversation. There was something about her that drew him in, an authenticity that felt like a breath of fresh air in his carefully curated world. I'm Daniel, by the way. Grace. She smiled then, a real smile that transformed her entire face. Thank you, Daniel. Really. You have no idea how much this means to me. The taxi pulled away, leaving them standing on the sidewalk as evening shoppers and diners moved around them. Daniel realized he was staring, caught off guard by the way her smile seemed to light up the gathering dusk. Daddy. Lila's voice cut through his trance. Are you coming back? He turned to see his daughter still waiting by the restaurant door, and when he looked back at Grace, her expression had changed. Recognition dawned in her eyes, followed quickly by something that looked like panic. You're Daniel Pierce, she said, and it wasn't a question. Yes, and you're late. She glanced at the restaurant, then back at him, her face cycling through emotions too quickly for him to read. This is... wow. Miranda said my date was in business, but she didn't mention that I'm probably old enough to be your father and have more money than sense. The joke fell flat. Grace's expression grew more guarded, and Daniel kicked himself for defaulting to his usual self-deprecating humor about his wealth. It was a defense mechanism that usually worked at charity galas and business dinners, but something told him Grace Moore didn't find his billionaire status amusing. You're not that old, she said carefully. And I don't know anything about your sense. But Miranda definitely undersold the situation. Lila, apparently tired of being ignored, marched over and inserted herself between them. Hi, I'm Lila. Are you Daddy's new friend? Grace's entire demeanor shifted as she looked down at the little girl. The guardedness melted away, replaced by genuine warmth. Hi, Lila. I'm Grace. It's very nice to meet you. Are you coming to dinner with us? We're supposed to meet someone, but I don't know who. Grace glanced up at Daniel, a question in her eyes. He found himself nodding, even though every rational part of his brain was screaming that this was already more complicated than he'd signed up for. If that's all right with your dad, Grace said carefully. It's more than all right, Daniel heard himself saying. Shall we go in? The hostess at Bella Luna recognized Daniel immediately. His donations to the restaurant owner's various charities had earned him permanent VIP status and seated them at a quiet corner table despite the busy Friday night crowd. Daniel helped Lila into her booster seat, hyper-aware of Grace watching the interaction with those perceptive hazel eyes. "You're very good with her," Grace observed as they settled into their seats. "I've had 3 years of practice." Daniel found himself relaxing slightly. "Though some days I feel like I'm still figuring it out as I go." Most parents feel that way. The ones who think they have it all figured out are usually the ones to worry about. There was something in her tone that suggested experience, and Daniel found himself curious about her story. But before he could ask, Lila launched into her favorite topic of conversation. "Do you like pandas?" she asked Grace seriously. "Because they're my favorite animal and Mr. Bao is my best friend." She held up her stuffed panda for inspection. Grace examined the worn toy with the gravity of a museum curator studying a priceless artifact. "He's beautiful. Does he have any special powers?" Lila's eyes lit up. "He can make bad dreams go away, and he knows all the best hiding spots for treasure. Those are excellent powers to have. I bet he's been on lots of adventures with you." As Lila launched into an elaborate tale about Mr. Bao's latest expedition to find hidden cookies in the kitchen, Daniel found himself studying Grace's face. She listened with complete attention, asking follow-up questions that showed she was genuinely engaged, not just humoring a child. When Lila mentioned that Mr. Bao sometimes felt sad because he missed Mommy, Grace's expression grew soft with understanding rather than the awkward discomfort most people showed when his daughter's motherless status came up. "Mr. Bao sounds very wise," Grace said when Lila finished her story. "I bet he knows that missing someone you love just means they were very special. That's what Daddy says too." Lila beamed at this validation of family wisdom. The waiter appeared to take their order, and Daniel watched as Grace studied the menu with the careful attention of someone for whom the prices mattered. She ordered a simple pasta dish and water, declining his offer of wine with a polite smile that didn't quite hide her discomfort. "Are you sure?" he pressed gently. "They have an excellent wine list here." "I'm sure, thank you. I don't drink much." She folded her menu decisively. "Tell me about your work, Daniel. Miranda mentioned you're in business, but she was pretty vague about the details." It was a transparent attempt to change the subject, but Daniel found himself oddly reluctant to talk about Pierce Industries. Usually his professional accomplishments were safe territory, impressive enough to demonstrate his success, boring enough to avoid gold-digger accusations. But something about Grace made him want to skip the usual script. "I run a development company. We build things: office buildings, residential complexes, the occasional hotel. It's not as exciting as it sounds in movies." "I don't know about that. Creating spaces where people live and work seems pretty important. Do you enjoy it?" The question caught him off guard. When was the last time someone had asked if he enjoyed his work rather than how successful it was or how much money it made? "I used to," he said honestly. "Lately it feels more like maintenance. Keeping things running, meeting expectations, checking boxes. Maybe you need a new project, something that excites you again." Before Daniel could respond, their food arrived. Lila had ordered spaghetti and meatballs naturally and proceeded to demonstrate why eating pasta was an extreme sport for 3-year-olds. Grace watched with amusement as tomato sauce found its way onto Lila's cheek's nose and somehow her left ear. "Here, sweetie," Grace said, reaching across the table with her napkin. "You've got a little—" She gently wiped the sauce from Lila's face with the practiced efficiency of someone comfortable around children. Daniel felt something tighten in his chest as he watched the interaction. It had been so long since he'd seen another adult care for his daughter with such natural ease. Mrs. Chen, Lila's nanny, was wonderful, but this felt different. More personal. "Thank you," Lila said solemnly, apparently deciding Grace had passed some crucial test. "Daddy's not very good at the sauce parts. He always misses spots." "I do not miss spots," Daniel protested, though he was smiling. "You do too. Mrs. Chen has to fix it after." Grace laughed, a sound that seemed to brighten the entire restaurant. "Well, sauce spotting is a very specialized skill. It takes years of practice." "Do you have practice?" "A little. I work with kids at a community center downtown. Lots of art projects, which means lots of paint and glue and general messiness." Daniel found himself leaning forward, genuinely interested. "What kind of community center?" "Rainbow Bridge. We provide after-school programs, summer camps, that sort of thing. A lot of our families are, well, they need somewhere safe for their kids to go while they're working." The way she said it told Daniel more than her words did. This wasn't some prestigious nonprofit with wealthy donors and gala fundraisers. This was the kind of place that fought for every dollar, where dedicated people worked for passion rather than profit. "That sounds rewarding," he said, meaning it. "It is. The kids are amazing. They're so resilient, so full of hope despite everything life has thrown at them. They remind me every day what's really important." Something in her voice suggested she'd learned that lesson the hard way. But before Daniel could explore that thought, Lila dropped her fork with a clatter. "I'm full," she announced, though she'd barely eaten half her meal. "Are you sure you usually finish all your meatballs?" "My tummy says it's done. Can I draw?" Daniel reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the small notebook and crayons he'd learned to carry everywhere. Lila immediately set to work on what appeared to mount a very ambitious artistic project involving multiple colors and a lot of concentrated tongue sticking out. "You're prepared," Grace observed with approval. "Learned that lesson the hard way. Hungry 3-year-old equals chaos. Bored 3-year-old equals disaster. Smart dad." They fell into comfortable conversation as Lila drew and Daniel found himself relaxing in a way he hadn't in months. Grace asked thoughtful questions about his work, his life in Seattle, his thoughts on everything from urban development to the best playground equipment. She listened with genuine interest, building on his answers, rather than just waiting for her turn to speak. More importantly, she didn't seem impressed by his wealth or status. If anything, she appeared slightly uncomfortable when he mentioned his penthouse apartment or the Pierce Industries building. It was refreshing and unsettling in equal measure. "What about you?" he asked as the waiter refilled their water glasses. "Have you always worked with kids?" "Not always. I have a degree in social work, but it took me a while to find the right fit. I worked for a few different organizations before landing at Rainbow Bridge." "What made it the right fit?" Grace was quiet for a moment, her fingers tracing patterns on the tablecloth. "It felt like home, I guess. Like a place where I could actually make a difference instead of just existing." Daniel heard the weight behind those words, the suggestion of a story with difficult chapters. And before Seattle, small town in Oregon, nothing exciting. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Sometimes a change of scenery is exactly what you need. Before he could ask what she was running from, because he was certain now that she was running from something, Lila looked up from her drawing with a triumphant expression. "Done." She held up her artwork for inspection. "It's our dinner." Daniel studied the colorful creation, which featured 3 stick figures sitting around what might have been a table if tables were purple and had what appeared to be wings. It's beautiful, sweetheart. Who are all the people? That's you, and that's me, and that's Miss Grace. Lila pointed to each figure in turn. We're all happy because we're having spaghetti and being friends. Grace's breath caught slightly as she looked at the drawing. You included me. Of course you're part of our dinner family. Lila said this as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. Daniel watched Grace's face cycle through emotions, surprise, pleasure, and something that looked almost like pain. She blinked rapidly, and for a moment he thought she might cry. That's the nicest thing anyone's given me in a long time, she said softly. You can keep it. Lila offered generously. I'll make Daddy a new picture tomorrow. I would love to keep it. Thank you, Lila. When the check arrived, Daniel reached for it automatically, but Grace's hand shot out to stop him. We should split it, she said firmly. That's not necessary. Yes, it is. Her tone brooked no argument. I can pay for my own dinner. Daniel studied her face, seeing the pride and determination there. Most women in his social circle would have been offended if he hadn't automatically picked up the check. Grace seemed offended that he had. All right, he said carefully. If that's what you prefer. She smiled, then the tension leaving her shoulders. Thank you for understanding. As they waited for the waiter to process their separate payments, Daniel found himself reluctant for the evening to end. When was the last time he'd enjoyed a dinner this much? When was the last time he'd met someone who challenged his assumptions about everything from restaurant etiquette to what constituted good conversation? This was really nice, Grace said as they gathered their things. Much better than I expected when Miranda set this up. Much better than you expected? Daniel raised an eyebrow. Should I be offended? No, I just meant blind dates are usually disasters, at least in my experience. She looked embarrassed. Not that I have a lot of experience with blind dates, or dates in general recently. Daniel found himself wanting to ask about her dating history, and why someone as beautiful and interesting as Grace Moore was single. But they were moving toward the door now, and Lila was tugging on his hand, ready to go home. Outside the restaurant, they stood awkwardly on the sidewalk, the evening air carrying the scent of rain and possibilities. Daniel realized he didn't want to say goodbye, didn't want to return to his empty penthouse, where the silence would remind him of everything he'd been missing. Can I give you a ride home? He asked. That's not necessary. I can take the bus. Grace. He waited until she looked at him. Let me give you a ride. Please. Something in his tone must have convinced her because she nodded. Okay. Thank you. Daniel's car, a sleek black BMW that probably cost more than most people made in a year, was parked in the restaurant's valet area. As the attendant brought it around, Daniel noticed Grace's slight intake of breath. Nice car, she said neutrally. It's practical, he replied, though they both knew that was a lie. Good safety ratings. The drive to Grace's apartment in the Capitol Hill neighborhood was filled with Lila's chatter about her drawing and plans for the next day. Grace lived in a modest building that had seen better decades. Its brick facade weathered but well-maintained. Daniel pulled up to the curb, noting the way Grace's hand hovered over the door handle as if she couldn't wait to escape. Thank you for dinner, she said, turning to face him. And for earlier with the taxi. You didn't have to do that. I wanted to. They looked at each other for a moment, and Daniel felt something pass between them, a connection, an understanding, a possibility he wasn't quite ready to name. Bye, Miss Grace, Lila called from her car seat. Will we see you again? Grace's expression grew soft. I hope so, sweetie. Daniel watched her walk up the steps to her building, noting the way she turned to wave before disappearing inside. Only then did he realize he hadn't asked for her number, hadn't made any plans to see her again. The thought sent a spike of something that might have been panic through his chest. "Daddy," Lila said, as they drove home through the quiet Seattle streets. "I like Miss Grace." "Do you? Why?" "She listens with her whole face, and she thinks my drawings are important, and she smells like vanilla cookies." Daniel smiled despite the strange ache in his chest. Those are good reasons to like someone. "Do you like her too?" The question was simple, innocent, but it hit Daniel like a freight train. Did he like Grace more? The woman who'd refused his money split the dinner check and listened to his daughter's stories with the attention of someone who understood that children's words mattered. The woman who worked with kids who needed hope, who'd somehow made him laugh more in 3 hours than he had in 3 months. "Yes," he said quietly. "I think I do." "Then we should see her again." "It's not that simple, sweetheart." "Why not? If you like someone and they like you, you see them again. That's how friendship works." If only it were that simple. But Daniel's world was complicated by wealth and expectations, by the memory of a wife he'd loved and lost, by the fear that loving someone new meant betraying the woman who'd given him the greatest gift of his life. Grace Moore represented something he hadn't felt in 2 years' hope, and hope was terrifying. Back at his penthouse, Daniel tucked Lila into bed with her customary 3 stories and a glass of water that had to be exactly half full. As she drifted off to sleep, clutching Mr. Bao, Daniel found himself standing at his bedroom window, looking out at the city lights, and thinking about hazel eyes and a smile that seemed to light up the world. His phone buzzed with a text from Ethan. "How did it go?" Daniel stared at the message for a long time before typing back. "Complicated." That was an understatement. In the space of one evening, Grace Moore had reminded him that he was more than just a CEO and a father. He was a man who'd forgotten how to live. The question was whether he was brave enough to remember. As he lay in bed that night, Daniel found himself thinking about Lila's drawing, 3 stick figures around a purple table, all of them smiling. For the first time in 2 years, the future felt like something more than just an endless series of days to get through. It felt like a possibility, and that scared him more than any business deal ever had. The next morning arrived with the kind of crisp Seattle sunshine that made the previous night's rain seem like a distant memory. Daniel stood in his kitchen, mechanically going through the motions of making coffee, while his mind replayed every moment of dinner with Grace. The way she'd wiped sauce from Lila's face, the careful way she'd insisted on paying her share, the genuine warmth in her eyes when she'd accepted Lila's drawing. "Daddy, you're staring at the coffee machine like it did something wrong," Lila observed from her perch at the breakfast bar, where she was methodically destroying a bowl of cereal. "Just thinking, sweetheart." "About Miss Grace." Daniel's hand stilled on his coffee mug. Sometimes his daughter's perceptiveness was unnerving. "What makes you think that you get the same face when you think about Mommy, but different, like happy sad instead of just sad?" Before Daniel could process that devastating observation, his phone rang. Ethan's name flashed on the screen, and Daniel considered letting it go to voicemail. He wasn't ready to dissect last night with anyone, especially not Ethan's relentless optimism. "You have to answer," Lila said matter-of-factly. "Uncle Ethan will just keep calling until you do. Remember last time?" She was right. Daniel swiped to answer. "Morning, Ethan. Please tell me you didn't completely blow it." Ethan's voice carried the exhaustion of someone who'd spent the night in surgery, but also an underlying anxiety that made Daniel smile despite himself. "Hello to you too. How's Mrs. Patterson? Appendix-free and complaining about the hospital food, so she'll live. Stop deflecting. How was dinner?" Daniel glanced at Lila, who was listening with the shameless curiosity of a 3-year-old. "Can we discuss this later? That bad. That complicated. Complicated. How did she hate you? Did you hate her? Did she run screaming when she realized who you were?" "She didn't run screaming." Daniel moved to the window looking out at Elliott Bay, where ferries traced white lines across the blue water. "But she might as well have. I think I overwhelmed her. Or maybe you underwhelmed yourself. When's the second date? There isn't going to be a second date. Why not? And don't give me some bullshit about being too busy or not ready. I've been watching you disappear into yourself for 2 years, Daniel. Last night was the first time in months you've sounded like an actual human being." Daniel wanted to argue, but Ethan wasn't wrong. He had been disappearing, retreating into the safety of routine and responsibility, until even Lila noticed his emotional absence. "It's not that simple. We're from different worlds." So Romeo and Juliet were from different worlds too. They both died. Bad example. How about Ethan? Daniel's tone cut through his friend's rambling. "She split the dinner check, insisted on it. When I offered to drive her home, she looked like she wanted to bolt. She's not interested in what I have to offer. Maybe what you have to offer isn't your bank account." The words hung in the air between them, carrying a weight of talent that made Daniel's chest tight. He'd spent so many years being valued for what he could provide: financial security, social status, material comfort, that the idea of someone wanting him for just him felt foreign and terrifying. "Daddy!" Lila called from the kitchen. "Mrs. Chen is here." Daniel heard the front door open and the familiar sound of his housekeeper's cheerful greeting. Mrs. Chen had been with them since Lila was 6 months old, and her arrival meant Daniel needed to leave for the office soon. "I have to go," he told Ethan. "Think about it, okay? Sometimes the best things in life are the ones that scare us the most." After ending the call, Daniel found Mrs. Chen in the kitchen, already engaged in animated conversation with Lila about her latest artistic creation. Helen Chen was a 60-year-old dynamo who ran Daniel's household with gentle efficiency and loved Lila as if she were her own granddaughter. "Good morning, Mr. Pierce," she said, her slight accent adding warmth to the formal address she insisted on maintaining, despite his repeated requests for her to call him Daniel. "Miss Lila tells me you had dinner with a very nice lady last night." "Her name is Grace," Lila supplied helpfully. "She likes pandas, and she thinks my drawings are important, and she smells like vanilla cookies." Mrs. Chen's eyebrows rose with interest. "A lady who appreciates art and smells like cookies. This sounds promising." "It was just dinner," Daniel said quickly, grabbing his laptop bag. "A favor for Ethan." "Daddy liked her," Lila announced. "He got his happy, sad face." "Happy, sad face," Mrs. Chen looked intrigued. "It's different from his work face and his tired face and his missing mommy face. It's like when the sun comes out, but it's still a little cloudy." Daniel stared at his daughter, struck once again by her ability to see straight through to the heart of things. When had she become so wise? When had he become so transparent? "I really do have to go," he said, kissing Lila's forehead. "Be good for Mrs. Chen." "I'm always good. Are you going to see Miss Grace again?" The question followed him out the door and stayed with him during the elevator ride down to the parking garage. As he drove through downtown Seattle toward his office, Daniel found himself taking a detour that led him past the Capitol Hill neighborhood where he'd dropped Grace off the night before. He told himself he was just curious about the area, maybe considering it for a development project. But when he found himself slowing down in front of her building, he had to admit the truth. He wanted to see her again. The realization was both exhilarating and terrifying. At Pierce Industries, Daniel threw himself into work with the determined focus that had built his empire. He had back-to-back meetings about the new waterfront development, a conference call with investors in Portland, and a stack of contracts that needed review. But throughout the morning, his mind kept drifting to Hazel Eyes and the way Grace had listened to Lila's stories, as if they were the most important thing in the world. Around noon, his assistant buzzed the intercom. "Mr. Pierce, there's a Grace Moore here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but she says it's about last night." Daniel's heart rate spiked. "Send her up." He stood as Grace entered his office, taking in her appearance with the desperate attention of a man seeing water after days in the desert. She wore the same blue dress from the night before, but in the harsh fluorescent lighting of his office building, he could see how worn the fabric was, how carefully mended. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she carried herself with the same quiet dignity that had first caught his attention. "I'm sorry to bother you at work," she said, hovering near the door as if ready to flee. "I should have called first, but I don't have your number, and I needed to." "Please sit down." Daniel gestured to the leather chairs arranged around his conference table, deliberately avoiding the more intimidating setup of his desk. "Can I get you anything, coffee, water?" "I'm fine, thank you." Grace perched on the edge of a chair, her posture rigid with nervous energy. "I wanted to return this." She pulled something from her purse and placed it on the table between them. It was the $40 he'd given the taxi driver, carefully counted out in smaller bills. Daniel stared at the money, feeling something twist in his chest. "Grace, you don't need to." "Yes, I do." Her voice was quiet but firm. "I pay my own debts." It wasn't a debt. It was kindness. Kindness with strings attached feels a lot like charity, and I don't accept charity. The words stung partly because he recognized the truth in them. He had acted out of kindness, but there had been other motivations too, the desire to help, yes, but also the unconscious assumption that his money could solve any problem, smooth over any difficulty. "I'm sorry," he said. "That wasn't my intention." "I know." Grace's expression softened slightly. "And I'm grateful, really. But I needed you to understand that I can take care of myself." "I never doubted that." "Didn't you?" She leaned back in her chair, studying his face. "Be honest, Daniel. When you saw me arguing with that taxi driver, what did you think?" Daniel considered lying, giving her the polite response that would avoid conflict. But something about Grace demanded honesty. "I thought you were in trouble and needed help. And when you found out I was your blind date? What did you think then?" This was harder territory. I thought you were different from what I expected." "Different how?" "More real." The words came out before he could stop them. "Everyone in my world wants something from me. Money, connections, status. You split a dinner check and returned $40. You're either completely genuine or playing a very long game." Grace was quiet for a moment, her fingers tracing patterns on the polished conference table. "I grew up poor, Daniel. Really poor. The kind where you count quarters to buy milk and wear the same shoes until they fall apart. I learned early that accepting help usually comes with a price, and that price is almost always your dignity." Daniel felt something cold settle in his stomach. Not everyone who offers help expects something in return. In my experience, they do. Maybe not right away, maybe not obviously, but eventually. The bill always comes due. "What happened to you?" Grace looked up sharply, and Daniel saw pain flicker across her features before she could hide it. That's not important. What matters is that I know who I am and what I can afford to accept. Last night was lovely, truly. Lila is an amazing little girl, and you're— She paused, searching for words. You're not what I expected either. But this— She gestured between them, encompassing the office, the vast windows overlooking the city, the evidence of his wealth and power. This isn't my world. It doesn't have to be about the money. Doesn't it? Look around, Daniel. Look at where we're sitting right now. This office probably costs more to rent per month than I make in a year. Your car costs more than most people's houses. How do we bridge that gap? Daniel wanted to argue, to point out that money was just numbers on a screen, that at his core he was the same person who'd sat in that restaurant listening to his daughter's stories. But looking at Grace's face, seeing the careful walls she'd built around herself, he began to understand the magnitude of what she was saying. So that's it, he asked. One dinner and goodbye. That's probably for the best. Is it what you want? The question hung between them, and Daniel saw Grace's composure crack slightly. For a moment, her carefully maintained control slipped, and he glimpsed something raw and vulnerable underneath. What I want doesn't matter, she said finally. This is about what's realistic. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I can give you. Daniel stood and moved to the window, looking out at the city sprawling below. From 42 floors up, people looked like ants, cars like toys. It was a perspective that had once made him feel powerful, but now it just made him feel isolated. Can I tell you something? He said without turning around. Before Sarah died, I used to think I had everything figured out. Success, family, purpose. Then cancer came and took her away in 6 months, and I realized how little control I actually had over anything that mattered. He heard Grace shift in her chair, but didn't look back. For 2 years, I've been going through the motions. Taking care of Lila, running the company, telling myself that was enough. And it was until last night. Until I met someone who made me remember what it felt like to be more than just a function. Daniel. I'm not asking you to marry me or move into my penthouse or any of the things you're probably afraid I'm thinking. I'm asking if you'd like to have coffee sometime. Maybe take Lila to the zoo. Normal things that normal people do when they enjoy each other's company. When he finally turned around, Grace was staring at her hands, her expression unreadable. You don't understand what you're asking. Then help me understand. She looked up then, and Daniel saw tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. I work with kids whose parents can't afford to feed them properly. I live in a studio apartment with a radiator that only works half the time. I shop at thrift stores and clip coupons and count every dollar because I have to. Your world and mine don't intersect, Daniel. They can't. Why not? Because eventually you'll want to fix things for me. You'll want to pay for dinner, buy me clothes, help with my rent. And I'll either have to accept it and lose myself, or reject it and lose you. Either way, I lose. Daniel felt the truth of her words like a physical blow. She was right, he did want to fix things for her. The thought of Grace worrying about money, living in an apartment with a broken radiator, shopping at thrift stores, out of necessity rather than choice, made him want to solve all of it with a few phone calls and wire transfers. What if I promised not to do that? Could you keep that promise, really? If we were dating and I couldn't afford to go somewhere, you wanted to take me, would you just accept that? If I got sick and couldn't pay for treatment, would you stand back and watch me suffer? If Lila wanted to buy me a birthday present, and you had to explain that Miss Grace can't afford the kind of gifts your family gives, would you be okay with that? Each question hit him like a hammer blow, because he knew with devastating certainty that he couldn't make any of those promises. His instinct would always be to solve, to provide, to use his resources to eliminate any obstacle in their path. "I see," Grace said quietly, reading his silence. "That's what I thought." She stood and moved toward the door, and Daniel felt something like panic rise in his throat. "Grace, wait. This isn't your fault," she said, pausing with her hand on the door handle. "You're a good man, Daniel, a kind man, but we're too different. The gap is too wide." "What about Lila? She's already attached to you." It was a low blow, and they both knew it. Grace's face crumpled slightly before she composed herself. "Children are resilient. She'll forget about me." "Will you forget about her? About last night?" Grace's hand tightened on the door handle, and for a moment, Daniel thought she might break down entirely. Instead, she straightened her shoulders and gave him a smile that was heartbreaking in its sadness. "Take care of yourself, Daniel, and give Lila a hug from me." She was gone before he could respond, leaving Daniel alone in his office with $40 on the conference table and the feeling that he'd just lost something precious without ever really having it. He stood there for a long time, staring at the money she'd left behind. It represented more than just the taxi fare. It was a line in the sand, a declaration of independence, a wall built to protect herself from the very thing he wanted to offer her. His phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Chen. "Miss Lila asking when she can see Miss Grace again. What should I tell her?" Daniel stared at the message, his thumb hovering over the keyboard. How did he explain to a 3-year-old that sometimes adults made things complicated for no good reason? How did he tell his daughter that the woman who'd made them both smile for the first time in months had decided they were too different to be friends? He typed back. "Tell her Miss Grace is very busy with work." It wasn't exactly a lie, but it felt like one. Everything felt like a lie right now. His success, his control, his ability to give Lila everything she needed. Because what Lila needed, what they both needed, was sitting in some cramped apartment across town, probably convincing herself she'd made the right choice. That evening, Daniel picked up Lila from Mrs. Chen's early, unable to concentrate on work any longer. As they drove home through the Seattle traffic, Lila chattered about her day, the book Mrs. Chen had read to her, the cookies they'd baked, the pigeon she'd seen on the balcony that reminded her of Mr. Bao. "Daddy," she said, as they waited at a red light, "can we call Miss Grace? Why would we call her sweetheart? To say hi, and to tell her about the pigeon, and to see if she wants to have dinner again." Daniel's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Miss Grace is very busy with her work. Too busy for friends." The innocent question cut straight to the heart of everything. Too busy for friends. Too proud for help. Too afraid for love. "Sometimes grown-ups make things complicated," Daniel said carefully. "That's silly. Friends aren't complicated. You like them, and they like you, and you spend time together. That's what friendship is. If only it were that simple." But Daniel's world was built on complications, contracts and negotiations, social hierarchies and unspoken rules. Grace's world seemed built on survival and self-reliance, on maintaining dignity in the face of circumstances beyond her control. That night, after tucking Lila into bed with her customary stories and precisely half a glass of water, Daniel found himself standing in his kitchen with a bottle of wine and no appetite for food. The penthouse felt enormous and empty, the silence broken only by the distant hum of traffic 42 floors below. His phone rang, and for a moment his heart leaped with the irrational hope that it might be Grace. Instead, Ethan's name appeared on the screen. "How did the grand gesture go?" Ethan asked without preamble. "What grand gesture? The one where you swallowed your pride and went after the woman who's obviously perfect for you. Please tell me you didn't just let her walk away." Daniel moved to the living room windows, looking out at the city lights twinkling like stars. She brought me $40. Come again. The taxi fare from last night. She came to my office to return it. Said she doesn't accept charity. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Okay, wow. She's got spine, I'll give her that. She's got pride. Too much of it. Or maybe she's just been hurt before. People don't build walls that high without a good reason. Daniel thought about the pain he'd glimpsed in Grace's eyes, the careful way she'd spoken about learning that help always came with a price. She thinks we're too different. That my money makes any relationship between us impossible. And what do you think? Daniel was quiet for a long moment, considering the question seriously. I think she's probably right. I do want to fix things for her. I want to make her life easier, safer, more comfortable. And she's smart enough to know that accepting that would change who she is. So you're just giving up. I'm being realistic. Bullshit. Ethan's voice carried the force of someone who'd spent years cutting through Daniel's defenses. You're being scared. There's a difference. What am I supposed to do? Ethan force her to accept help she doesn't want, pursue someone who's made it clear we don't belong together. You could try showing her that you're willing to meet her where she is instead of expecting her to come to where you are. What does that mean? Figure it out. You're supposed to be the smart one. After hanging up, Daniel poured himself a glass of wine and sat in his living room surrounded by artwork that cost more than most people's cars and furniture that had been featured in design magazines. Everything in his life was expensive, exclusive evidence of his success and status. What would it look like to meet Grace where she was, to step outside the bubble of wealth and privilege he'd lived in for so long that he'd forgotten there was any other way to exist? The questions followed him to bed and lingered in his dreams, mixing with images of hazel eyes and a smile that had made him remember what hope felt like. When he woke the next morning, Daniel Pierce, CEO, single-father billionaire, had no answers. But for the first time in 2 years, he had something that felt almost as valuable, the desperate need to find them. The answer came to Daniel 3 days later in the most unexpected place imaginable. He was leaving the downtown courthouse after a zoning meeting that had run longer than expected, his mind still wrestling with variance requirements and environmental impact studies when he heard it. The unmistakable sound of children's laughter echoing from somewhere nearby. Following the sound around the corner, he found himself standing outside a modest community center whose painted sign read Rainbow Bridge Children's Center in cheerful hand-painted letters. Through the large windows, Daniel could see Grace kneeling on the floor, surrounded by a circle of children who couldn't have been more than 6 or 7 years old. She was reading from a picture book, her voice animated, as she brought the characters to life with different accents and gestures. The children hung on her every word, their faces bright, with the kind of wonder that Daniel remembered seeing in Lila's eyes during story time. He stood frozen on the sidewalk, watching this glimpse into Grace's world. Here in this place that smelled faintly of tempera paint and graham crackers, she belonged completely. There was no hesitation in her movements, no careful walls in her expression. She was radiant with purpose, beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with expensive clothes or professional styling. "Excuse me, sir. Can I help you?" Daniel turned to find a middle-aged woman with graying hair and kind eyes standing in the doorway of the center. She wore a paint-splattered apron over jeans and had the patient demeanor of someone who'd spent years working with children. "I'm sorry," Daniel said, feeling suddenly foolish. I heard the children laughing." The woman's expression softened with understanding. "It's a beautiful sound, isn't it? I'm Maria Santos, the director here. Are you interested in our programs?" Daniel glanced back through the window where Grace was now leading the children in what appeared to be a song about a dancing elephant. Actually, I was wondering about volunteering. I have a 3-year-old daughter, and I've been thinking it might be good for both of us to get more involved in the community. It wasn't entirely a lie. He had been thinking about Lila's social development, about the bubble of privilege they lived in, and whether it was healthy for a child to grow up so isolated from the realities most people faced. "That's wonderful," Maria said, her face lighting up. "We're always looking for volunteers, especially male role models. So many of our children don't have consistent father figures in their lives." She led him inside, past walls covered with children's artwork and motivational posters, into a small office that was organized chaos incarnate. Papers covered every surface, filing cabinets overflowed with forms and documents, and a coffee pot that had seen better days gurgled in the corner. "Please sit down," Maria said, clearing a stack of grant applications from a chair. "Tell me about yourself." Daniel found himself in the unusual position of downplaying his background rather than emphasizing it. He mentioned that he worked in development, that he was a single father, that he believed in giving back to the community. He carefully avoided mentioning Pierce Industries, his net worth, or the fact that he could probably buy the building they were sitting in with pocket change. "And what kind of volunteering were you thinking about?" Maria asked, pulling out a clipboard thick with forms. "I'm not sure." "What do you need most?" Maria laughed, a sound that held equal parts exhaustion and affection. "Honestly, everything. We need reading volunteers, art project helpers, mentors for our older kids, people to help with field trips. We run on grants and donations, so we're always operating on a shoestring budget." Through the office window, Daniel could see Grace moving between tables where children were working on some kind of craft project. She crouched beside each child, offering encouragement and gentle guidance, her entire being focused on their small triumphs and struggles. "I'd like to help however I can," Daniel heard himself saying. "When could I start?" An hour later, Daniel found himself walking back to his car with a volunteer packet and a schedule that had him returning the following Tuesday for orientation. He'd somehow committed to reading to preschoolers every week and helping with the center's annual fundraising carnival next month. As he drove back to his office, Daniel tried to convince himself that this was a reasonable decision. He wanted to understand Grace's world, yes, but he also genuinely believed that volunteering would be good for him and Lila. They lived in a bubble insulated from struggle by money and privilege. Maybe it was time to step outside that bubble. His phone rang as he pulled into the Pierce Industries parking garage. Mrs. Chen's name appeared on the screen. "Mr. Pierce." "I'm sorry to bother you, but Miss Lila is asking about Miss Grace again. She wants to know if we can visit her at work." Daniel's heart clenched. For 3 days, he'd deflected Lila's questions about Grace with vague responses about being busy, but his daughter's persistence was wearing down his defenses. "What exactly is she saying?" "She drew another picture this morning of her and Miss Grace and something that looks like a playground. She keeps asking when they can play together." Daniel closed his eyes, leaning back against his car seat. "I'll talk to her tonight." "Mr. Pierce, if you don't mind me saying, Miss Lila has been talking about Miss Grace the way she used to talk about her mother. Not the same, but important. Like someone who matters." The observation hit Daniel like a physical blow. Lila had loved Sarah with the uncomplicated devotion of a baby who knew only warmth and security. After Sarah's death, Daniel had watched his daughter's world shrink, her trust become more cautious. The fact that Grace had somehow broken through those carefully built defenses in the space of one dinner spoke to something Daniel wasn't sure he was ready to acknowledge. "I understand," he said quietly. "Thank you for telling me." That evening, Daniel picked up Chinese takeout on the way home, partly because he was too emotionally drained to cook, and partly because he knew Lila would be distracted by lo mein noodles during the conversation they needed to have. They ate at the kitchen island, Lila chattering about her day, while Daniel tried to figure out how to explain adult complications to someone who saw the world in terms of friends and fun, right and wrong. "Daddy," Lila said, around a mouthful of noodles. "Mrs. Chen said you have something important to tell me. Mrs. Chen talks too much sometimes. She said it was about Miss Grace." Daniel set down his chopsticks, knowing he couldn't postpone this any longer. "Lila, you remember how I explained that sometimes grown-ups can't be friends even when they want to?" Lila's expression grew serious the way it always did when she sensed important adult information coming her way. "Like when Tommy's mom and dad got divorced. Sort of like that, but different. Miss Grace and we come from very different places. Sometimes that makes friendship complicated. But you both like me." The simple statement cut straight to the heart of everything. "Yes, we both like you very much. And you like each other. I could tell." Daniel felt his chest tighten. Sometimes liking someone isn't enough, sweetheart. Sometimes there are other things that get in the way. What kinds of things? How did he explain money and pride and fear to a 3-year-old? How did he make her understand that the adult world was full of invisible barriers that children couldn't see? "Grown-up things," he said finally. "Things that don't make sense even to grown-ups sometimes." Lila considered this with the gravity of a Supreme Court justice. "That's silly." "I know it seems silly. Can we fix it?" The question was asked with such innocent confidence that Daniel felt his heart break a little. In Lila's world, problems had solutions. Broken toys could be glued back together. Hurt feelings could be mended with hugs. Complicated adult emotions could be resolved with simple honesty and good intentions. "I don't know, baby. I don't know if we can fix this one." Lila was quiet for a long moment, pushing lo mein noodles around her plate with the concentration of someone working through a complex problem. "Daddy," she said finally, "when Mommy was sick, you said we couldn't fix her, but we could still love her." Daniel's breath caught. They rarely talked about Sarah's illness in such direct terms, and hearing Lila connect those memories to their current situation was both heartbreaking and profound. "That's right. Maybe we can't fix the grown-up things with Miss Grace, but we can still love her." The wisdom of it stunned him. Love didn't require proximity or perfect circumstances. It didn't need problems to be solved or barriers to be removed. It simply existed, patient and enduring, waiting for the world to catch up. "You're very wise, little one." "I know. Can I have ice cream now?" The next morning, Daniel called Maria Santos and confirmed his volunteer schedule. If he couldn't be with Grace, he could at least understand the world she'd chosen to inhabit. He could see what drew her to this place, what made her feel more at home among struggling families, and donated supplies than she ever could in his penthouse. Tuesday arrived, gray and drizzling, typical Seattle weather that matched Daniel's uncertain mood as he pulled into the small parking lot behind Rainbow Bridge. He'd dressed carefully in jeans and a simple sweater, trying to look approachable rather than intimidating. The last thing he wanted was to stand out as obviously wealthy among people who were doing important work on impossible budgets. Maria met him at the front door with a warm smile and a volunteer name tag that read Daniel P. She led him through the center, pointing out different program areas and explaining the daily routine. The place was busier than he'd expected, filled with the controlled chaos of children engaged in learning and play. "We serve about 100 kids regularly," Maria explained as they walked. Most come here after school while their parents work. We provide homework, help dinner, and safe activities until pickup time. In the summer, we're here all day. Daniel found himself doing mental calculations as they talked. 100 kids, operating costs, staff salaries, facility maintenance. The numbers didn't add up to anything approaching financial stability. Yet somehow this place existed, thrived even on dedication and donated resources. "How do you manage it?" he asked. "Financially, I mean." Maria's laugh held a note of exhaustion. "Carefully, very carefully. We write grants, hold fundraisers, rely on the kindness of local businesses. Some months we're not sure we'll make rent, but somehow it works out. It always works out." They paused outside a classroom where Daniel could see Grace leading a group of elementary school children through what appeared to be a science experiment involving baking soda and vinegar. She wore jeans and a bright yellow t-shirt with the Rainbow Bridge logo, her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She looked younger, somehow more relaxed than she had during their dinner or their confrontation in his office. "Grace is one of our best volunteers," Maria said, following his gaze. "She started coming here about a year ago, just a few hours a week at first. Now she's here almost every day. The kids adore her." "What's her background?" "Social work degree, but she was working for a big nonprofit downtown when she first found us. Corporate environment, lots of bureaucracy. She said she felt like she was pushing papers instead of helping people." Maria paused, studying Daniel's expression. "Do you know Grace?" Daniel felt heat rise in his cheeks. "We met recently. Mutual friends." "She's special," Maria said simply. "The kind of person who sees need and responds without thinking about what's in it for her. We're lucky to have her." Before Daniel could respond, the classroom door opened and children began streaming out, chattering excitedly about their experiments. Grace appeared in the doorway, laughing at something one of the kids had said, and her smile faltered when she saw Daniel standing in the hallway. "Grace," Maria called out, "I'd like you to meet our newest volunteer. This is Daniel. He's going to be helping with reading time." Grace's face cycled through surprise, confusion, and something that might have been hurt before settling into careful politeness. "Hello, Daniel?" "Grace." He found himself struggling for words under her steady gaze. "It's good to see you." "Maria," Grace said, not taking her eyes off Daniel. "Could you excuse us for a minute?" "Of course, Daniel. Why don't you two get acquainted while I set up for story time?" Maria disappeared with the tact of someone who recognized undercurrents even when she didn't understand them, leaving Daniel and Grace alone in the hallway. The sounds of children playing drifted from nearby classrooms, but the space between them felt charged with unspoken questions. "What are you doing here?" Grace asked quietly. "Volunteering." "Don't." Her voice was sharp with a pain he didn't fully understand. "Don't do this." "Do what?" "Follow me. Try to fix my life. Swoop in with your money and your good intentions and turn my world upside down." Daniel felt a flash of anger at the accusation. "I'm not trying to fix anything. I'm trying to help. By inserting yourself into my workplace, by showing up where I feel safe, by learning about something that matters to you, by trying to understand why you'd rather work here for free than let me buy you dinner." Grace stared at him for a long moment, and Daniel saw the war playing out behind her eyes. She wanted to trust him, he realized. Part of her wanted to believe that his presence here was about genuine interest, rather than pursuit disguised as charity. "You don't belong here," she said finally. "Why not?" "Because in 6 months, when the novelty wears off, and you realize how messy and hard and thankless this work really is, you'll disappear. You'll go back to your penthouse and your business deals and your world where problems can be solved with money. And these kids will wonder why the nice man stopped coming to read to them. The accusation hit home because Daniel had wondered the same thing himself. How long would his commitment last when faced with the grinding reality of persistent poverty and systemic problems that couldn't be solved with a single generous donation? "Maybe you're right," he said. "Maybe I will get discouraged and quit. Maybe I don't have what it takes to do this kind of work long term. But maybe I do. Maybe this is exactly what I need to remember what actually matters. And if you're wrong, if you decide this isn't for you after all, then I'll be honest about it. I won't just disappear. I'll explain to Maria and the kids that I need to step back, and I'll make sure my absence doesn't hurt the programs I was involved in." Grace searched his face, looking for something he hoped she would find. "Why here, Daniel? Of all the places you could volunteer, why Rainbow Bridge?" The honest answer was too complicated and too revealing. "Because this is where you belong. Because I need to understand what makes you choose this over comfort. Because watching you with these children is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. Because Lila needs to understand that not everyone lives the way we do," he said instead. "Because I want her to grow up knowing that privilege comes with responsibility. Because maybe I need to learn those lessons too." Before Grace could respond, Maria's voice called from down the hall. "Daniel, we're ready for story time if you are." Grace stepped aside to let him pass, but as he moved toward the classroom, she caught his arm. "Don't hurt them," she said quietly. "These kids have been let down by enough adults. Don't be another one." "I won't. Promise me." The intensity in her voice told him this was about more than his commitment to the center. This was about her own history of being let down, about trust given and broken. "I promise," he said, meaning it more than he'd meant anything in a long time. The next hour was unlike anything Daniel had experienced in years. Sitting cross-legged on a carpet square surrounded by a dozen children between the ages of 4 and 7, he read stories about brave mice and magical gardens, and friendship overcoming impossible odds. The kids hung on every word, gasped at plot twists, and cheered for happy endings with the kind of uninhibited joy that Daniel had forgotten existed. "Mr. Daniel," a little girl named Sophie asked when he finished the second book, "do you have kids?" "I have a daughter. She's 3 years old." "What's her name?" "Lila." "Does she like stories too?" "She loves stories. Maybe someday she can come visit and meet all of you." The suggestion popped out before Daniel could stop it, and he glanced toward the back of the room where Grace was helping another volunteer organize craft supplies. She was listening, he realized, even though she was pretending to focus on her work. "That would be awesome," Sophie said. "We could show her our art room and the playground and the fish tank in Miss Maria's office. I'm sure she'd love that." As storytime ended and the children moved to their next activity, Daniel found himself reluctant to leave. There was something intoxicating about this place, about the sense of purpose that permeated every interaction. He understood now why Grace chose to spend her time here instead of pursuing higher-paying opportunities elsewhere. "You're a natural," Maria said, as she helped him gather the books. "The kids responded really well to you." "They're amazing, all of them." "They are. And resilient in ways that would break your heart if you let yourself think about it too much." Maria's expression grew serious. "A lot of our families are living paycheck to paycheck if they're lucky enough to have paychecks. Single parents working multiple jobs, grandparents raising grandchildren, families one crisis away from homelessness. These kids have seen more than they should have to at their age." Daniel thought about Lila's biggest worry being whether her sandwich was cut into triangles or rectangles, and felt something twist in his chest. "How do you stand it?" knowing what they're facing at home. By focusing on what we can control, we can't fix poverty or absent parents or addiction or any of the big systemic problems, but we can provide a safe place for a few hours a day. We can make sure they get a nutritious meal and help with homework and adults who believe in them. It's not enough, but it's something. As Daniel prepared to leave, he caught sight of Grace in the art room kneeling beside a boy who couldn't have been more than 10 years old. The child was crying silently, tears streaming down his face as he stared at a half-finished drawing. Grace spoke to him in a voice too quiet for Daniel to hear, but whatever she said made the boy nod and pick up his crayon again. "That's Marcus," Maria said, following Daniel's gaze. "His mom works 3 jobs to keep their apartment. He's here from 7 in the morning until 8 at night most days. Grace has a special relationship with him." "What happened to his father?" "Gone. Like a lot of fathers in this neighborhood. These kids learn early that adults don't always stick around." The words hit Daniel with unexpected force, reminding him of Grace's warning about not becoming another adult who let these children down. He thought about his own father, present, but emotionally distant, more interested in business than in his son's daily struggles and triumphs. Daniel had sworn to be different with Lila, to be present and engaged and emotionally available. But had he succeeded, or had grief and work and the careful management of his public persona made him distant in ways he didn't recognize? "I'll see you next week," he told Maria as they reached the front door. "We'll be here. We're always here." Driving home through the late afternoon traffic, Daniel found himself taking a different route than usual, one that led through neighborhoods he rarely saw. Single-family homes gave way to apartment complexes, manicured lawns to small patches of grass worn thin by children's play. This was where Rainbow Bridge drew its families from, where parents worked multiple jobs and counted every dollar, and hoped their children's futures would be brighter than their present circumstances. At a red light, Daniel watched a mother walking with 2 young children, grocery bags in both hands, and exhaustion in every line of her body. The children chattered beside her, oblivious to their mother's fatigue, and Daniel found himself wondering about their story. Did they go to Rainbow Bridge? Did Grace know their names, help them with homework, comfort them when they cried? His phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Chen. "Miss Lila asking about your day. Says you went somewhere special." Daniel stared at the message, unsure how to respond. How did he explain that he'd spent the afternoon reading to children whose lives were nothing like Lila's, in a place where Grace felt more at home than she ever would in his world? He typed back, "Tell her I made some new friends today. We'll talk about it at dinner." That evening, as he and Lila shared pizza at their kitchen island, Daniel found himself telling her about Rainbow Bridge, about the children who came there after school, and the volunteers who helped them with homework and activities. "Do they have toys?" Lila asked her 3-year-old mind, immediately focusing on the essentials. "Some toys, yes, but not as many as you have." "Why not?" The question that had no simple answer. "Because toys cost money, and not everyone has the same amount of money." Lila considered this with the gravity she brought to all new information. "We have lots of toys." "We do. Maybe we could share some." The innocent suggestion hit Daniel like a revelation. Lila, at 3 years old, had immediately grasped something that had taken him 34 years to truly understand. Abundance meant nothing if it wasn't shared. "That's a very kind idea, sweetheart. Would you like to pick out some toys to donate?" "Yes, and books too, mister." Daniel was reading to the kids, right? "They probably need more books." For the rest of the evening, Daniel watched his daughter with new eyes as she carefully selected items to give away. She approached the task with the seriousness of someone who understood she was making a difference, even if she couldn't articulate exactly how. Later that night, after Lila was asleep, Daniel stood in his living room, surrounded by bags of toys and books, his phone in his hand. Grace's number was still in his contacts, from when Ethan had given it to him before their blind date. He'd never used it respecting her wishes for distance, but tonight felt different. He typed and deleted a dozen messages before settling on something simple. Lila wants to donate some toys and books to Rainbow Bridge. Would that be okay? The response came back surprisingly quickly. The kids would love that. You can bring them any weekday before 6. Daniel stared at the message, looking for subtext, for any hint of softness or invitation, but it was purely practical, the kind of response she might give to any donor. He typed back, "Thank you. See you next Tuesday." This time, there was no response at all. As Daniel finally headed to bed, he found himself thinking about Marcus, the little boy who'd been crying in the art room. What had made him so sad? What words had Grace spoken to comfort him? How many children like Marcus passed through Rainbow Bridge each year, carrying burdens too heavy for their small shoulders? For the first time in his adult life, Daniel Pierce fell asleep, thinking about problems that couldn't be solved with money, about love that existed without conditions, and about a woman who'd chosen purpose over comfort and community over isolation. It would be another week before he understood that he'd already chosen to follow her path, even if he didn't yet know where it would lead. The following Tuesday arrived with unseasonable warmth, the kind of early spring day that made Seattle residents abandon their rain jackets and venture outside with the desperate hope that winter might finally be loosening its grip. Daniel packed Lila's donated toys and books into his car, along with his daughter herself, who had insisted on personally delivering her gifts to the children at Rainbow Bridge. "Remember what we talked about?" Daniel said, as they pulled into the community center's small parking lot. "Some of these children don't have as much as you do at home." "I remember, Daddy. That's why we're sharing." Lila clutched her favorite book, a worn copy of Corduroy that she'd read so many times the pages were soft as cloth, and surveyed the modest building with the curiosity of an explorer discovering new territory. "Is Miss Grace in there?" Daniel's chest tightened at the question. "She might be, but we're here to donate your toys, not to bother Miss Grace while she's working." "I'm not bothering. I'm visiting." The confidence in her voice made Daniel smile despite his anxiety. Lila had never learned to doubt her own welcome in the world, a gift of security that Daniel hoped she'd never lose. Maria Santos met them at the front door, her face lighting up when she saw the bags Daniel carried and the small girl beside him. "You must be Lila," Maria said, crouching down to the 3-year-old's level. "Your daddy told us you wanted to share some of your toys with our kids." "I brought books too," Lila announced, holding up her copy of Corduroy. "This one's my favorite, but I think other kids should know about Corduroy too. He's very nice even though he's missing a button." Maria's expression grew soft with the kind of wonder that adults reserved for moments when children revealed their natural goodness. "That's very generous of you, Lila. Would you like to meet some of our children?" As Maria led them through the center, Daniel was struck again by the contrast between this place and his daughter's usual environment. Rainbow Bridge hummed with controlled energy, children's voices mixing with the sounds of learning, and play walls covered with artwork that spoke of creativity nurtured rather than perfection demanded. It felt alive in a way that his sterile penthouse never could. They found Grace in the same room where Daniel had first seen her reading to a group of children who looked to be around Lila's age. She wore jeans and a soft green sweater that made her eyes look more golden than brown, her hair falling in gentle waves around her shoulders. When she looked up and saw Daniel and Lila in the doorway, her expression shifted through surprise, pleasure, and something that looked almost like pain. Miss Grace. Lila broke free from Daniel's hand and ran toward the reading circle with the fearless enthusiasm of a child who expected to be welcomed everywhere. Grace's face transformed as Lila approached all careful guards, dropping away to reveal genuine joy. Lila, what are you doing here? We brought presents for the kids. Daddy said you work here with children who need more toys and books. Lila settled herself in the reading circle as if she'd been attending story time at Rainbow Bridge her entire life. Can I hear the story too? Of course you can. Grace glanced at Daniel over Lila's head, a question in her eyes that he couldn't quite read. We're reading about a little elephant who's afraid of the dark. As Grace continued the story, Daniel found himself mesmerized by the transformation in her demeanor. Here, surrounded by children who hung on her every word, she radiated confidence and joy. This was Grace in her element. He realized not the guarded woman who'd returned his taxi money, or the defensive person who'd questioned his motives for volunteering. This was who she truly was when she felt safe and valued. The elephant was very scared. Grace read her voice taking on the tremulous quality of fear, until he realized that the dark was full of friends he just couldn't see yet. Lila raised her hand with the earnestness of a child who had something important to contribute. I used to be scared of the dark too, but Daddy gave me a nightlight that looks like stars, and now I like it because it's like sleeping outside. That sounds beautiful, Grace said. What else helps when you're scared? Mr. Bao, Lila said, referring to her stuffed panda, and remembering that Daddy's right down the hall, and thinking about happy things like ice cream and swings. A little boy named David raised his hand. My grandma says when I'm scared I should think about all the people who love me. That's wonderful advice, Grace said, and Daniel heard something in her voice that made him wonder who Grace thought about when she was scared, who she counted among the people who loved her. After story time ended, Lila insisted on personally distributing her donated toys to the children, explaining the special features of each item with the gravity of someone passing on precious heirlooms. Daniel watched his daughter's generosity with a mixture of pride and amazement. She gave away her possessions with genuine joy, as if the act of sharing multiplied rather than diminished what she had. Your daughter is remarkable, Grace said quietly, appearing beside Daniel as they watched Lila demonstrate the proper way to make a toy dinosaur roar. She gets that from her mother. Does she? I think she might get some of it from her father, too. Daniel turned to look at Grace, surprised by the warmth in her voice. I'm not sure about that. Most days I feel like I'm just trying not to mess her up too badly. The fact that you worry about that probably means you're doing better than you think. Grace paused, watching Lila help a shy little girl named Rosa operate a pop-up book. Thank you for bringing her today. The kids need to see that sharing isn't just something adults talk about. It's something real people actually do. Lila wanted to come. She's been asking about this place ever since I told her about it. And how are you finding the volunteer work? Is it what you expected? Daniel considered the question carefully. The honest answer was that nothing about Rainbow Bridge was what he'd expected. He'd anticipated feeling useful, perhaps slightly noble, for donating his time to a worthy cause. Instead, he found himself looking forward to his Tuesday story times with an eagerness that surprised him. The children's unguarded affection, their resilience in the face of circumstances beyond their control, their capacity for joy, despite having so little, all of it challenged everything he thought he knew about happiness and success. It's humbling, he said finally. These kids have taught me more in 2 weeks than I've learned in years of board meetings. What have they taught you? That joy doesn't require perfect circumstances. That generosity isn't about the size of the gift. That sometimes the most important thing you can give someone is just presence. Grace was quiet for a moment, her gaze moving between Daniel and Lila, who was now leading a group of children in what appeared to be an impromptu parade around the reading area. "I owe you an apology," Grace said suddenly. "For what? For assuming you were here because of me. For thinking this was some elaborate way to, I don't know, pursue me or prove a point." She turned to face him fully, her expression open in a way he hadn't seen since their first dinner. "Maria told me about your conversation with her, about why you wanted to volunteer, about wanting Lila to understand privilege and responsibility. I meant what I said. I know. I can see it in the way you are with the kids, in the way you listen to them. You're not performing charity. You're actually engaging. There's a difference." Before Daniel could respond, Lila appeared at his side, slightly out of breath from her parade activities, but glowing with satisfaction. "Daddy, can we stay longer? Rosa wants to show me the fish tank, and David said there's a playground out back, and Miss Grace said maybe we could paint pictures together." Daniel looked at Grace, who shrugged with a smile that made his heart skip. "If you have time, we're starting art projects in about 10 minutes. Lila seems very interested in our finger painting station. Please, Daddy, I promise I won't get too messy." The plea was unnecessary. Daniel was already mentally rearranging his afternoon schedule. When was the last time he'd canceled business meetings to spend time finger painting? When was the last time he'd prioritized play over productivity? "All right," he said. "But we should probably call Mrs. Chen and let her know we'll be late for dinner." The next hour passed in a blur of washable paint construction paper and the kind of laughter that Daniel realized he'd been missing from his life. Lila threw herself into art making with the fearless creativity of someone who'd never been told that mistakes were something to avoid. She painted what she called rainbow trees and dancing suns, each creation more gloriously chaotic than the last. Daniel found himself at a small table with Marcus, the boy he'd seen crying during his first visit. Today, Marcus seemed calmer, more engaged, though he still worked with the careful concentration of someone much older than his 5 years. "What are you painting, Marcus?" Daniel asked, genuinely curious about the swirls of blue and green covering the boy's paper. "It's the ocean," Marcus said without looking up. "My mom says maybe this summer we can go to the beach if she gets enough hours at her job." "Have you ever been to the beach before?" Marcus shook his head. "But I seen pictures. It looks like it goes on forever, like the sky, but on the ground." The simple poetry of the description hit Daniel unexpectedly. This child, who probably lived within an hour of some of the most beautiful coastline in the country, had never experienced the simple joy of sand between his toes or waves lapping at his feet. "The ocean is pretty special," Daniel said carefully. "Very peaceful. I bet you'd love it. Miss Grace says maybe the whole group can go on a field trip sometime if they can find a bus and enough grown-ups to help watch everyone." Daniel glanced across the room to where Grace was helping another child clean paint from her fingers and felt something click into place in his mind. A field trip to the beach. Transportation supervision, probably lunch for dozens of children. The logistics alone would be daunting for an organization running on Rainbow Bridge's shoestring budget. But not impossible. Not if someone stepped in to help make it happen. "That sounds like a wonderful idea," Daniel told Marcus, already making mental notes. As the art session wound down and parents began arriving for pickup, Daniel helped Lila wash paint from her hands and gather her masterpieces. She'd created enough artwork to wallpaper a small room, each piece carefully explained and proudly displayed. "Miss Grace," Lila said, as they prepared to leave, "thank you for letting me paint with your kids. Thank you for sharing your toys and books with us. That was very kind. Can I come back sometime?" Grace glanced at Daniel before answering. If your daddy thinks that's a good idea, we'd love to have you visit again. I think that's a very good idea, Daniel said, meaning it more than he'd meant anything in weeks. As they walked to the car, Lila chattering about her new friends and planning return visits, Daniel found himself thinking about Marcus and beach trips, about field trip logistics, and the kind of magic that happened when resources met genuine need. That evening, after Lila was finally settled in bed with her new artwork carefully displayed on her bedroom walls, Daniel sat in his home office with his laptop open and his phone within reach. What started as casual research about charter bus rentals and beach permits quickly evolved into a comprehensive plan for what could be Rainbow Bridge's most ambitious field trip ever. The logistics were complex but manageable. Transportation for 50 children and accompanying adults, permits for group activities at a state park beach lunch, and snacks for the day, basic safety equipment. The total cost would be substantial by Rainbow Bridge's standards, but barely a rounding error in Daniel's monthly budget. The question was how to make it happen without turning it into exactly the kind of grand gesture that had made Grace uncomfortable in the first place. This couldn't be about him or his money or his desire to solve problems with his checkbook. It had to be about the children, about Marcus's dream of seeing an ocean that went on forever like the sky but on the ground. Daniel was still mulling over the problem when his phone rang. Ethan's name appeared on the screen, and Daniel realized he hadn't talked to his friend in over a week. "Please tell me you're calling with good news," Ethan said without preamble. "Miranda's been asking about the status of your love life, and I'm running out of creative ways to avoid the subject." "There is no status. Grace made it clear that we're too different for anything to work between us." "And yet you've been volunteering at her workplace every week." Daniel shouldn't have been surprised that Ethan knew about Rainbow Bridge. His friend had an uncanny ability to gather information about anything he considered important, and Daniel's love life apparently fell into that category. "How did you never mind? It's not about Grace, it's about the kids." "Right. I'm sure your sudden interest in children's charities has nothing to do with a certain beautiful social worker." "Ethan, I'm not judging, man. I'm actually impressed. You found a way to be part of her world without steamrolling over her boundaries. That's growth." Daniel leaned back in his desk chair, staring at the notes he'd made about beach trips and bus rentals. "I want to do something for these kids. Something special. But I don't know how to do it without making Grace think I'm trying to buy my way into her good graces." "What kind of something?" Daniel explained Marcus's dream of seeing the ocean, the potential field trip, the logistics and costs involved. As he talked, he could hear Ethan's excitement building through the phone. "That's perfect," Ethan said when Daniel finished. "It's about the kids, not about impressing Grace. And it's the kind of thing that creates memories these children will carry forever." "But how do I propose it without making it seem like I'm trying to be the hero? Grace is already suspicious of my motives." "Easy. You don't propose it. You make it possible and let someone else take the credit." "What do you mean? Work through Maria. Set up the funding as an anonymous donation, maybe through a foundation or something. Let Maria think it came from a grant application or a generous donor who wants to remain unnamed. Grace never has to know you were involved." The idea was brilliant in its simplicity. Daniel could make Marcus's beach trip dream a reality without triggering Grace's defenses about his wealth and resources. The children would get their magical day by the ocean, and Grace would never have to struggle with accepting help from him. "You're a genius," Daniel said. "I have my moments. Just don't let this be about trying to win Grace over through grand gestures. If you're doing this, do it because those kids deserve something wonderful, not because you think it'll change how she sees you." After hanging up with Ethan, Daniel spent another hour refining his plan. He would establish the donation, through his family's foundation, making it appear as part of their regular charitable giving rather than a targeted gesture. Maria would receive notice of the grant within a few days, and the field trip could happen before the weather turned too cold for beach activities. It was perfect, almost too perfect, which made Daniel wonder if he was being entirely honest with himself about his motives. Yes, he wanted to give these children an unforgettable experience. But wasn't he also hoping that Grace would see him differently when she witnessed his generosity? Wasn't he still trying to prove something to her, even if he was doing it anonymously? The questions followed him to bed and lingered in his dreams, mixing with images of Marcus painting ocean waves and Lila sharing toys with children who had so little. When he woke the next morning, Daniel had convinced himself that motives didn't matter as much as outcomes. Whatever his reasons for arranging the beach trip, the children would benefit. That had to be enough. The grant notification arrived at Rainbow Bridge on Friday, and Maria called Daniel personally to share the news. "I can't believe it," she said, her voice vibrating with excitement. $50,000 for enrichment activities and field trips. It's like a miracle. "That's wonderful," Daniel said, working to keep his voice neutral. "What are you thinking of doing with it?" "Well, Grace has been dreaming about taking the kids to the beach for months. With this funding, we could charter buses, arrange for lunch, maybe even hire some additional supervisors. It would be the trip of a lifetime for most of these children." "That sounds perfect. When are you thinking of scheduling it?" "As soon as possible before the weather changes. Maybe next Friday. Grace is already making lists of everything we'll need." Daniel smiled to himself, imagining Grace's excitement as she planned the logistics of giving her children a day they'd never forget. "I'm sure it'll be amazing." "Daniel, I don't suppose you'd be interested in chaperoning. We'll need all the adult supervision we can get, and the kids adore you." The invitation was exactly what Daniel had been hoping for, even though he'd been careful not to angle for it. "I'd be honored to help." "Wonderful. And feel free to bring Lila if you'd like. I'm sure she'd love to see the ocean with her new friends." That evening, Daniel told Lila about the upcoming beach trip, watching her face light up with the kind of pure joy that made everything else seem insignificant. "Can I build sandcastles with Marcus and Rosa and David?" she asked, bouncing on her toes with excitement. "I think that's exactly what they'd love to do." "Will Miss Grace be there?" "Yes, she'll be there." "Good. She should see the ocean too. I bet she's never been on a really good beach trip." Once again, Lila's innocent observation cut straight to the heart of things. Daniel found himself wondering about Grace's childhood, about whether she'd ever had the luxury of family vacations or trips to the beach, probably not given what she'd shared about growing up poor. This trip might be as magical for her as it would be for the children. The thought of seeing Grace experience that kind of joy filled Daniel with an anticipation that had nothing to do with his complicated feelings about their relationship, and everything to do with wanting someone he cared about to have something beautiful. Tuesday's volunteer session took on a different energy as news of the beach trip spread through Rainbow Bridge. The children could talk of nothing else, their excitement infectious as they planned sandcastle architectures and debated the best techniques for finding seashells. Grace moved among them with a glow that Daniel had never seen before. Her usual careful composure replaced by something that looked like pure happiness. "I can't believe it's really happening," she confided to Daniel as they supervised a group of children making paper fish during craft time. "Some of these kids have never seen the ocean. Marcus asked me yesterday if the water really goes all the way to the horizon, like in pictures. It's going to be incredible for them." "It's going to be incredible for me too," Grace admitted, then looked surprised at her own honesty. "I grew up about an hour from the coast, But we never had money for gas to drive there, let alone for parking and food for a whole day. This will actually be the first time I've been to the beach in over 10 years. Daniel felt his heart clench at the casual way she mentioned growing up too poor for a simple day trip. Then this really will be special for everyone. The grant was so generous. $50,000 for field trips and enrichment activities. It's more than we usually receive in an entire year from all sources combined. Maria's already talking about other trips we could plan, maybe a visit to the Science Museum or the zoo. The pleasure in her voice made Daniel glad he'd arranged for the grant to be substantial enough to fund multiple adventures. These children deserved every experience he could provide, and Grace deserved to see her dreams for them become reality. You must be excited to plan everything. I am, but I'm also terrified, Grace said with a laugh. Coordinating 50 children, 10 chaperones, 3 buses, and a full day at the beach. There are so many things that could go wrong, and even more things that could go right. Grace looked at him, then really looked, and Daniel saw something shift in her expression. When did you become so optimistic? Maybe when I started spending time here. It's hard to be pessimistic around people who find joy in finger paints and story time. Is that what you're finding here, Joy? The question was asked quietly, almost hesitantly, as if Grace wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. Daniel considered deflecting, giving her something safe and generic about the satisfaction of community service. Instead, he found himself being honest. I'm finding perspective, purpose, things I didn't know I was missing until I found them here. Before Grace could respond, Marcus appeared at their table, his latest artwork clutched in his small hands. Miss Grace, look, I painted the beach trip. He held up a paper covered in swirls of blue and yellow, with stick figures that might have been children playing in the sand. That's me building the biggest sandcastle ever, and that's you helping me find shells, and that's Mr. Daniel teaching everyone how to skip rocks. Daniel's breath caught. He'd never mentioned knowing how to skip rocks, but somehow Marcus had included him in his vision of the perfect beach day, assigned him a role in the child's imagination of paradise. It's beautiful, Marcus, Grace said, her voice thick with emotion. Should we hang it up with the other beach pictures? As Marcus ran off to add his artwork to the growing display of ocean-themed creations, Grace turned back to Daniel with tears in her eyes. Do you see what you've done? She asked softly. What have I done? You've made yourself part of their story. These children, who have been disappointed by so many adults, who've learned not to trust that people will stick around, they're counting on you now. They've made space for you in their hearts. Daniel felt the weight of that responsibility settle over him like a mantle. I won't let them down. I know you won't. That's what scares me. Why does that scare you? Grace was quiet for a long moment, watching the children work on their beach-themed art projects. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Because if they can trust you, maybe I can too. And I don't know if I'm ready for that. The admission hung between them, fragile and honest and terrifying in its implications. Daniel wanted to reach for her hand, to tell her that she could trust him, that he would never hurt her, or these children, or the fragile community they'd all built together. Instead, he simply nodded, understanding that some promises had to be demonstrated rather than spoken. As the session ended and children began getting picked up by parents and guardians, Daniel helped Grace clean paintbrushes and organize art supplies. The comfortable routine of working together felt natural, as if they'd been partners in this endeavor for years rather than weeks. Daniel, Grace said, as they finished putting away the last of the craft materials, would you like to stay for dinner? We always eat together on Tuesdays, the kids whose parents are working late, the volunteers, whoever's still here. It's nothing fancy, just spaghetti and garlic bread, but I'd love to, Daniel said quickly before she could change her mind, or he could overthink the invitation. Dinner at Rainbow Bridge was unlike any meal Daniel had experienced in years. 20 children and 5 adults crowded around tables in the main activity room, sharing food and stories and laughter that echoed off the walls. Lila fit seamlessly into the chaos, chattering with new friends and helping the younger children with their spaghetti challenges. Daniel found himself sitting between Marcus and a 7-year-old girl named Isabella, who insisted on explaining the plot of every movie she'd ever seen. Across the table, Grace helped Rosa cut her garlic bread, while simultaneously listening to David's detailed account of his grandmother's cooking techniques. This was what family looked like, Daniel realized. Not the quiet, formal dinners he and Lila usually shared in their penthouse dining room, but this voices overlapping stories, being shared people caring for each other in the small daily ways that mattered most. "Mr. Daniel," Isabella said, pulling his attention back to the conversation. "Do you think there will be dolphins at the beach?" "There might be," Daniel said. "Sometimes dolphins come close to shore, especially in the morning. I hope we see some. I've never seen a real dolphin, only in pictures." "Well, even if we don't see dolphins, there will be lots of other amazing things. Seagulls and tide pools and maybe even sea stars." Isabella's eyes widened with wonder. "Sea stars are real, and very beautiful." As dinner wound down and the remaining children were collected by their families, Daniel helped with clean-up loading dishes into the industrial dishwasher and wiping down tables. The work felt good, purposeful, in a way that signing contracts and approving budgets never did. "Thank you," Grace said, as they finished the last of the cleanup, "for staying, for helping, for everything. Thank you for inviting me. This was..." Daniel searched for words that could capture how the evening had affected him. "This felt like home." Grace's expression grew soft, vulnerable in a way that made Daniel's chest tight. "It is home for a lot of these kids. Sometimes the only real home they have. And for you. For me too, I think. I never had anywhere that felt like this growing up. Safe and warm and full of people who cared about each other." Daniel wanted to ask about her childhood, about the circumstances that had taught her to be so self-reliant and suspicious of help. But the moment felt too fragile for heavy questions, too perfect to risk with painful history. Instead, he said, "I'm glad you found it, and I'm glad you let me be part of it even temporarily." "Who says it's temporary?" The question was asked lightly, almost casually, but Daniel heard the weight behind it. Grace was offering him something, not romance, not the complicated dance of courtship and seduction, but something more valuable: acceptance, belonging, a place in the community she'd built around love and service and shared purpose. "I'd like that," he said simply. "I'd like that very much." As they walked to the parking lot together, Lila sleeping peacefully in Daniel's arms, after her busy day of new friends and adventures, Grace paused beside her car. "Daniel," she said, her voice hesitant. "The beach trip. I know Maria said the grant was anonymous, but I wanted to thank you anyway." Daniel's heart stopped. "What makes you think I had anything to do with it?" "Because I've seen the way you look at these kids. Because I watched your face when Marcus talked about wanting to see the ocean. Because somehow, 3 days after you had that conversation with him, a miraculous grant appeared that would make his dream come true." They stood facing each other in the dim parking lot, the truth hanging between them like a bridge that could either connect them or collapse under the weight of misunderstanding. "Grace, I'm not angry," she said quickly. "I should be, probably. I should be upset that you went behind my back and used your money to solve problems I didn't ask you to solve. But I can't be angry when it means Marcus gets to see his ocean, when Isabella gets to look for sea stars, when 20 other children get to have the kind of memory that makes childhood magical. Daniel shifted Lila's weight in his arms, buying time to find the right words. I didn't do it to impress you or to prove anything. I did it because Marcus deserves to see the ocean, and because I could make that happen. I know. That's what makes this so complicated. Does it have to be complicated? Grace was quiet for a long moment, her keys jingling softly in her hand. I've spent my whole life learning to take care of myself, Daniel. Learning not to depend on other people's generosity, because it always comes with strings attached. But watching you with these kids, seeing how much you genuinely care about them. Maybe not all generosity has strings. This doesn't. I promise you, Grace. This is about them, not about us. And if there is no us, if I never feel ready for whatever this is between us, will you still show up every Tuesday? Will you still care about Marcus and Isabella and David when there's nothing in it for you? The question cut to the heart of everything, his motivations, his character, his ability to love without expectation of return. Daniel looked down at Lila sleeping trustingly in his arms, and thought about the lesson she'd taught him about loving people, even when you couldn't fix everything for them. Yes, he said, meaning it with every fiber of his being. I'll still show up. Not for you, not for me, but for them, because they deserve to have adults in their lives who don't leave. Grace smiled, then the first completely unguarded smile she'd ever given him. Then maybe we can figure out the rest as we go. She got into her car and drove away, leaving Daniel standing in the empty parking lot with his sleeping daughter and the feeling that something fundamental had shifted between them. Not resolved, not simplified, but shifted in a direction that felt like possibility. As he drove home through the quiet Seattle streets, Daniel found himself thinking about beach trips and sandcastles, about children who'd never seen the ocean, and the woman who'd dedicated her life to expanding their world one experience at a time. In 5 days, they would all pile into chartered buses and head west toward the coast, toward Marcus's horizon that went on forever like the sky, but on the ground. And for the first time since Sarah's death, Daniel Pierce was genuinely excited about the future. Friday morning arrived with the kind of crystalline clarity that made the Pacific Northwest feel like a postcard. Daniel woke before his alarm, his mind already racing with the logistics of the day ahead: 50 children, 3 charter buses, and a beach that would become the backdrop for memories that would last lifetimes. He found Lila already awake in her bedroom, sitting cross-legged on her bed, with Mr. Bao in her lap, staring out the window, as if she could will the sun to rise faster. "Is it time to go to the beach yet?" she asked without turning around. "Soon, sweetheart. We need to eat breakfast and get dressed first." "I already picked out my clothes." She pointed to a carefully arranged outfit on her chair, striped leggings, a bright yellow t-shirt, and her favorite sneakers. "And I packed Mr. Bao's swim clothes too." Daniel smiled, his heart swelling with affection for his daughter's meticulous planning. "Mr. Bao has swim clothes, the blue shorts Mrs. Chen made for him, and sunglasses." She held up a pair of doll-sized sunglasses that Daniel had never seen before. "I made them from pipe cleaners and foil. He needs to protect his eyes from the beach sun." As they made their way through breakfast, Daniel found himself checking his phone repeatedly for updates from Maria about departure times and last-minute logistics. The buses would pick up everyone at Rainbow Bridge at 8:30, arriving at the beach by 10. They'd have 6 hours of ocean time before heading back to the city. "Daddy, you're being nervous again," Lila observed, stirring her cereal with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd mastered breakfast independence. "Your face is doing the worry thing." "What worry thing?" "The thing where your eyebrows get close together and you look like you're trying to solve a really hard math problem." Daniel consciously relaxed his expression, marveling once again at his daughter's ability to read his emotions. "I'm just excited, and maybe a little nervous about making sure everyone has a good time." "They will. Miss Grace will make sure everyone's happy, and you'll help with the sandcastles, and I'll share my good shell-finding techniques with Marcus." "You have shell-finding techniques?" "I will by the time we get there. I'm going to figure them out on the bus." When they arrived at Rainbow Bridge, the parking lot was already buzzing with activity. 3 charter buses sat idling, while children and chaperones gathered in excited clusters, their voices creating a symphony of anticipation that could probably be heard 3 blocks away. Daniel spotted Grace. Immediately, she stood near the lead bus with a clipboard in one hand and a megaphone in the other. Her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her face glowing with the kind of joy that came from watching dreams become reality. "Miss Grace!" Lila broke free from Daniel's hand and ran toward the group, Mr. Bao bouncing in her arms. Grace's face lit up when she saw them approaching. "Lila, are you ready for the biggest adventure ever?" "I'm so ready. Mr. Bao's ready too. We brought emergency snacks and shell-collecting bags and sunscreen for pandas." "Sunscreen for pandas is very important," Grace said seriously. "We can't have Mr. Bao getting sunburned on his first beach trip." Daniel watched the interaction with the now familiar tightness in his chest that came from seeing Grace with children. Here, surrounded by chaos and excitement, and 50 different personalities all clamoring for attention, she was completely in her element. She moved through the crowd like a conductor leading an orchestra, somehow managing to keep track of permission slips and lunch allergies and bus seat assignments, while making each child feel heard and important. "Daniel." Maria appeared beside him, her usual calm demeanor replaced by the controlled panic of someone responsible for transporting precious cargo. "Thank goodness you're here. I need you on bus number 2 with Grace and the younger kids. Mrs. Patterson will take bus 3 with the older children, and I'll handle bus 1 with the middle group. Whatever you need. And can you do a final head count? I keep getting 47, but we should have 50 children plus 10 adults." As Daniel moved through the crowd, checking names against the master list, he caught fragments of conversations that made his heart swell. Marcus explaining to a new friend that the ocean was like a giant bathtub, but with fish. Isabella sharing her theory that dolphins were actually underwater unicorns. David wondering aloud if they'd be able to hear the ocean's heartbeat if they put their ears to the sand. 37, 38, 39. Daniel counted heads, checking off names and making sure each child had their designated buddy for the day. The buddy system had been Grace's idea, pairing each child with another for safety and companionship, ensuring no one would feel lost or left out. "Mr. Daniel." Sophie, the little girl who'd asked about Lila during his first story time, tugged on his jacket. "Is it true that if you put a seashell to your ear, you can hear the ocean even when you're not at the beach?" "It's true," Daniel said, crouching down to her level. "Would you like me to help you find a good shell for listening?" "Yes. And can you teach me how to make sandcastles that don't fall down?" "I'll do my best. Though sometimes the best part about sandcastles is building them again after they fall down." Sophie considered this with the gravity of someone encountering profound philosophy. "Like when my tower of blocks falls down, and I get to build a better one. Exactly like that." As the final preparations were completed, and children began boarding the buses, Daniel found himself assigned to a seat near the back of bus 2 with Lila beside him and Marcus across the aisle. Grace sat at the front with her clipboard and emergency supplies, but Daniel could see her reflection in the driver's mirror, and she was smiling with the kind of pure happiness that made everything else fade into background noise. This is really happening, Marcus said softly, pressing his face to the window as the bus pulled out of the Rainbow Bridge parking lot. We're really going to see the ocean. We really are, Daniel confirmed. Watching the city gradually give way to suburbs, and then to the rolling hills and dense forests that led to the coast. The 40-minute drive passed in a blur of songs and games and increasingly excited chatter as the landscape changed around them. Grace led the bus in rounds of I Spy and 20 questions that somehow managed to keep 50 energetic children engaged without reaching chaos levels. When someone started a spontaneous version of Old MacDonald's Farm, the entire bus joined in their voices, creating a joyful cacophony that probably violated several noise ordinances, but filled Daniel's heart to overflowing. "Daddy," Lila whispered during a brief lull in the singing, "this is the best day ever, and we haven't even gotten to the beach yet. It really is pretty special, isn't it? When we get home, can we call Grandma and Grandpa and tell them about our adventure? I think they'd like to hear about Marcus seeing the ocean for the first time." Daniel's parents lived in Arizona, now retirement snowbirds, who sent birthday cards and Christmas presents, but rarely made the effort to truly connect with their granddaughter's daily life. The idea of Lila wanting to share this experience with them, to include them in something so meaningful, spoke to her generous heart, and made Daniel wonder if he'd been too quick to write off his parents' capacity for growth. "I think that's a wonderful idea, sweetheart." When the buses finally crested the last hill, and the Pacific Ocean spread out before them in an endless expanse of blue-green water and white-capped waves, the collective gasp from 50 children was audible even over the engine noise. "It's bigger than I thought," Marcus breathed, his small face pressed against the window. "It's like the sky fell down and decided to be water instead," Isabella added from somewhere behind them. "I can see the edge of the world," David announced with the authority of someone making a scientific discovery. Grace stood up in the front of the bus, her voice carrying clearly through the sudden hush that had fallen over the children. "Everyone look out your windows. This is the Pacific Ocean. It's 3 times bigger than the entire United States, and it touches the shores of countries thousands of miles away. Some of the water you're looking at right now might have started as rain in Japan or waves near Australia." "Does that mean we're connected to kids in other countries?" Sophie asked. "In a way, yes. The ocean connects all of us." Daniel watched Grace's face as she spoke, seeing the wonder there that matched the children's expressions. This moment, this first glimpse of something vast and beautiful, and bigger than anything any of them had imagined, was as magical for her as it was for Marcus and Isabella and David. The beach parking lot was a flurry of organized chaos as 60 people disembarked from 3 buses and began the complex process of applying sunscreen, distributing lunches, and reviewing safety rules. Grace had clearly thought through every detail, designated boundaries for exploration, buddy system check-ins every 30 minutes, a central meeting point marked with bright orange flags. "Remember," she called out as the children gathered around her on the sand, "we stay between the orange flags, we never go in the water without a grown-up, and we take care of each other just like we do at Rainbow Bridge." "What if we find treasure?" asked a boy named Luis, who Daniel was meeting for the first time. "Then we share it with everyone," Grace replied without hesitation. "The best treasures are the ones that belong to the whole group." And then, like a dam breaking, the children scattered across the beach with shrieks of delight and wonder. Marcus headed straight for the water's edge, his eyes wide as he watched waves foam and retreat across the sand. Isabella began an immediate and systematic search for seashells, examining each find with the intensity of a gemologist. David started what would become an elaborate sand sculpture that appeared to involve multiple towers and a complex irrigation system. Daniel found himself following Lila toward a tide pool area where shallow pools of seawater had been trapped between rocks by the receding tide. The pools teemed with life sea anemones that waved like underwater flowers, hermit crabs scuttling between shells, starfish clinging to rocks with alien tenacity. Daddy, look. Lila crouched beside a pool that contained what appeared to be a small ecosystem's worth of marine life. It's like a whole underwater city. It really is. See those anemones? They're animals, not plants, even though they look like flowers. Can I touch them? Very gently. They're alive, so we want to be respectful visitors in their home. As Lila carefully explored the tide pool with one finger, Daniel became aware of Grace approaching with a small group of children in tow. She moved with the easy confidence of someone completely comfortable in the natural world, pointing out different species and explaining the delicate balance of tide pool ecosystems in terms that made sense to young minds. "Miss Grace," Marcus called from where he'd been standing, ankle deep in the surf. "The water keeps trying to steal the sand from under my feet." "That's because the ocean is always moving," Grace explained, wading out to join him. "It carries sand and shells and seaweed from one place to another. You're feeling the earth moving beneath you. It tickles." Marcus giggled, his initial nervousness about the water completely forgotten. Daniel watched Grace with Marcus and felt something shift in his chest. Something that had been building for weeks, but that he'd been too afraid to name. This wasn't just attraction or admiration, or even the complicated dance of two damaged people finding unexpected connection. This was love, pure and simple and terrifying in its completeness. He loved her generosity, her fierce protection of these children, her ability to find joy in small moments. He loved the way she listened with her whole attention, the way she made everyone around her feel important and valued. He loved her stubborn independence and her hard-won wisdom and the courage it must have taken to build a life centered on service rather than security. "Mr. Daniel," Isabella's voice broke through his reverie. "Come see what I found." She led him to a spot where the waves had deposited a collection of shells, unlike anything Daniel had seen outside of gift shops. Perfect sand dollars, spiraled shells that looked like tiny architectural marvels, pieces of sea glass worn smooth by countless tides. "It's like the ocean left us presents," Isabella breathed. "I think you're right. Sometimes the ocean is very generous." "Like Miss Grace." The innocent comparison hit Daniel unexpectedly. "What do you mean? Miss Grace is always giving us presents too. Stories and art projects and hugs when we're sad. And now she gave us this whole day at the beach." Daniel looked across the sand to where Grace was helping David reinforce his sand castle with a system of carefully constructed buttresses. Her jeans were wet to the knees, her hair had escaped its ponytail, and she looked happier than he'd ever seen her. "Yes," he said quietly, "like Miss Grace." The day unfolded in a series of perfect moments that seemed to exist outside of normal time. Lunch was eaten on blankets spread across the sand, with children trading sandwiches and sharing stories about their morning discoveries. Marcus had found 17 shells that he planned to arrange in order of how much they looked like the ocean's jewelry. Sophie had successfully learned to make drip castles, creating an elaborate fairy village that drew admiring crowds of her peers. After lunch, Grace organized a group walk along the water's edge with children hunting for shells and sea glass, while chaperones made sure no one wandered too far from the group. Daniel found himself walking beside her, both of them, keeping watchful eyes on their charges, while stealing moments to simply be present in the stunning afternoon light. "This is better than I ever imagined," Grace said softly, her voice barely audible over the sound of waves and children's laughter. "What did you imagine? Happy kids, some good memories, maybe a few pretty shells to take home. But this She gestured toward the beach where 50 children were engaged in the kind of unstructured play that seemed to be becoming extinct in their overscheduled world. This is magical. Look at them, Daniel. They're not thinking about homework or chores or any of the hard things waiting at home. They're just here completely present in this moment. Daniel followed her gaze, seeing Marcus teaching Luis how to time the waves, watching Isabella and Lila collaborate on an elaborate shell mosaic, noticing how David had somehow convinced 6 other children to help him with his increasingly ambitious sand architecture project. "You did this for them," he said. "This magic, this joy, it exists because you made it possible." Grace shook her head. "The grant made it possible. The volunteers, the chaperones, Maria's organizational skills, it took all of us. But you're the one who dreamed it. You're the one who believed they deserved something beautiful." Before Grace could respond, a commotion near the water caught their attention. Marcus had ventured slightly deeper than usual and been surprised by a larger wave, leaving him sitting in the surf with water up to his chest and a startled expression on his face. "Marcus!" Grace called, immediately moving toward him. But Marcus wasn't upset. As Grace reached him, he looked up with wonder written across his features. "Miss Grace, I felt the ocean's heartbeat. It pushed me over, but it was gentle, like it was saying hello." Grace knelt in the sand beside him, her jeans immediately soaked by the incoming waves. "Are you okay?" "I'm perfect. Can we stay here forever?" The question was asked with such innocent longing that Daniel felt his heart break a little. Forever wasn't possible, but this moment, this perfect sun-soaked afternoon, where children discovered magic and adults remembered what wonder felt like, would live in their memories long after the sand was washed from their shoes. "We can't stay forever," Grace said gently, helping Marcus to his feet. "But we can remember forever, and maybe we can come back someday." As the afternoon began to wind down and children started to tire from their adventures, Daniel found himself sitting on a piece of driftwood, with Lila curled against his side, both of them watching the sun begin its descent toward the horizon. "Daddy," Lila said drowsily, her voice thick with exhaustion and contentment. "This was the best day of my whole life." "Mine too, sweetheart." "Really? Even better than when you were little and went to the beach with Grandma and Grandpa?" Daniel realized with a start that he'd never taken family beach trips as a child. His parents had been too busy with work, too focused on building the successful business that would eventually become Daniel's inheritance. They'd given him every material advantage, but somehow missed the simple joy of a day spent building sandcastles and searching for shells. "This is better than any beach day I ever had," he said, meaning it completely. "Because of the kids, and because of Miss Grace, and because we're all here together." Lila was quiet for a moment, processing this with the deep thinking she brought to important topics. "Daddy, do you love Miss Grace?" The question was asked with characteristic 3-year-old directness, and Daniel felt his breath catch. "What makes you ask that? You get happy when she's around. And you look at her the way you look at me when you think I'm sleeping, but I'm really just pretending." "How do I look at you when you're pretending to sleep?" "Like you love me so much, it makes your heart too big for your chest." The poetry of her observation left Daniel speechless. Did he look at Grace that way? Did his feelings show so clearly that even a child could read them? "Yes," he said, finally knowing that Lila deserved honesty even when the truth was complicated. "I think I do love Miss Grace." "Good. Does she love you too?" "I don't know, sweetheart. Sometimes love is complicated for grown-ups." "Why?" The eternal question asked with the expectation that adults would have logical answers for everything. How did he explain fear and pride and the weight of past hurts to someone who approached the world with open arms and an expectation of goodness? Sometimes people are scared of being hurt. Sometimes they think they're too different from each other. Sometimes they don't believe they deserve to be loved. Lila considered this with the gravity she brought to all new information. That's silly. Everyone deserves to be loved. You're right. It is silly. So maybe you should tell Miss Grace that she deserves to be loved. Maybe she forgot. Before Daniel could respond to this devastating wisdom, a commotion near the water drew their attention. Grace was gathering the children for one final group activity, a goodbye ceremony, where each child would return something beautiful to the ocean while making a wish for the future. This is how we say thank you to the ocean for sharing its treasures with us, Grace explained as the group gathered in a circle near the water's edge. We each choose something special we found today and give it back to the sea while making a wish that we can carry home with us. Daniel watched as each child stepped forward with their chosen offering. Marcus returned a perfect sand dollar while wishing that his mom could see the ocean someday. Isabella gave back a piece of sea glass while wishing that all children could have days as magical as this one. David offered a spiral shell while wishing that his grandma would feel better soon. When it was Lila's turn, she walked solemnly to the water's edge with a small white shell clutched in her hand. She whispered something too quiet for the adults to hear before releasing the shell into a gentle wave. "What did you wish for?" Daniel asked when she returned to his side. "I wished for our family to stay together forever," she said simply. "Our family, you and me and Miss Grace. We're a family now, right? Like in my drawing from the restaurant." Daniel's heart stopped. In Lila's mind, they'd already become a unit, a chosen family bound together by love and shared experience rather than blood or law. The certainty in her voice, the matter-of-fact way she claimed Grace as part of their constellation, was both beautiful and terrifying. When Grace's turn came, she stood at the water's edge for a long moment, holding a piece of smooth driftwood that had been shaped by countless tides into something approaching art. She closed her eyes as she released it into the waves, and Daniel found himself desperately wishing he could know what hope she was sending out into the universe. As the ceremony concluded and children began the process of collecting their treasures and preparing for the journey home, Daniel noticed Grace standing slightly apart from the group, watching the sun sink lower toward the horizon. He approached carefully, not wanting to intrude on what looked like a private moment. "Penny for your thoughts," he said softly. "Just trying to memorize everything," Grace replied without taking her eyes off the water. "The way the light looks on the waves, the sound of the children's voices, the feeling of sand between my toes. I want to remember all of it." "You make it sound like it's ending." "Isn't it tomorrow we go back to the real world? The kids go back to their homework and their worries. I go back to grant applications and budget meetings. You go back to boardrooms and business deals. But we're all different now. Today changed us." Grace turned to look at him then, and Daniel saw something raw and vulnerable in her expression. "Did it change you?" "Completely." "How?" Daniel looked across the beach where Maria was helping children rinse sand from their feet, and volunteers were collecting the remains of lunch and tide pool exploration tools. This day, these people had shown him what life could look like when it was built around purpose instead of profit, when success was measured in children's laughter instead of quarterly earnings. "It reminded me what matters," he said. "It reminded me that the best parts of life can't be bought or scheduled or controlled. They just happen when you're brave enough to show up and be present." And what are you going to do with that reminder? The question felt like a challenge, a test of whether his transformation was real or just the temporary high of a perfect day. Daniel thought about his penthouse apartment, his corner office, his carefully structured life that kept emotional chaos at bay, but also kept out joy and spontaneity and the kind of love that made your heart too big for your chest. I'm going to try to live differently. I'm going to ask Lila what she wants to do instead of just assuming I know what's best for her. I'm going to keep volunteering here, not because it looks good on paper, but because these kids have become important to me, and I'm going to stop being afraid of wanting things I can't control. What kinds of things? Daniel turned to face her, fully knowing that this moment would determine everything that came after. This, a family that chooses each other instead of just accepting what genetics handed them. Grace's breath caught, and for a moment Daniel thought he'd miscalculated, pushed too hard, too fast. But then he saw tears gathering in her eyes, and her expression shifted from surprise to something that looked like hope. Daniel, I know it's complicated. I know we come from different worlds, and I know you have every reason not to trust someone like me. But today, watching you with these children, seeing how you've built a life around love and service and community, I realized that I don't want to go back to who I was before I met you. What if it doesn't work? What if we try and fail and end up hurting each other? Then we'll survive it. But Grace, what if we try and it's beautiful? What if we create something together that's better than either of us could build alone? Before Grace could respond, Lila appeared at Daniel's side. Mr. Bao tucked under one arm and a bag of carefully selected shells in her free hand. Miss Grace, she said, with the seriousness she reserved for truly important communications, Daddy told me he loves you. Daniel felt heat flood his cheeks. Lila, and I love you too. Lila continued, undeterred by adult embarrassment. And I think you love us back, even if you're scared to say it. Grace knelt down to Lila's level, her face cycling through emotions too quickly for Daniel to track. What makes you think I'm scared, sweetheart? Because you get the same face Daddy used to get when people asked him if he missed Mommy. Like you want to say something true, but you're worried it might hurt. The observation was so accurate, so devastatingly perceptive, that Daniel saw Grace's carefully maintained composure finally crack. Tears spilled over her cheeks as she pulled Lila into a hug that spoke of years of longing for exactly this kind of unconditional acceptance. You're very wise, Lila, Grace whispered into his daughter's hair. I know. So do you love us? Grace pulled back to look at both of them, her face wet with tears, but radiant with something that looked like breakthrough. Yes, I love you both so much it scares me. But scared doesn't mean no, right? Lila asked with the persistence of someone who'd learned to negotiate for what she wanted. No, sweetheart. Scared doesn't mean no. Daniel felt something fundamental shift in his chest, like tectonic plates settling into new alignment. This wasn't the fairy tale ending he might have imagined. There were still obstacles to navigate, logistics, to figure out the complicated work of building a life together from two very different starting points. But it was real, this love they'd found in the most unexpected place, and it was worth whatever challenges lay ahead. So what happens now? Grace asked, standing and brushing sand from her jeans. Now we figure it out as we go, Daniel said, echoing her words from the parking lot that had started everything. We take it slow, we communicate, we let Lila help us navigate the complicated parts, because she's apparently the wisest person in this family. Family, Grace repeated, as if testing how the word felt. Family, Lila confirmed with satisfaction. I told you my wish would come true. As the buses loaded up for the return journey to Seattle, Daniel found himself sitting beside Grace this time, with Lila sprawled across both their laps, exhausted by the day's adventures. The children's voices had grown quieter, many of them dozing against windows or leaning on each other with the comfortable intimacy of shared experience. "Miss Grace," Marcus called softly from across the aisle. "When can we come back to the beach?" "I don't know, sweetheart. But we'll find ways to have more adventures together." "Good, because the ocean told me it wants to see me again." "What did it tell you?" "It said I belong here by the big water. It said all of us belong anywhere there's love and people who care about each other." Daniel felt Grace's hand find his in the space between their seats, her fingers intertwining with his as they listened to Marcus's profound interpretation of his first ocean experience. "Out of the mouths of babes," Grace whispered. "He's right, you know. We do belong anywhere there's love. Even if I live in a studio apartment with a broken radiator, even then. Especially then. Even if I can't afford the kind of restaurants you're probably used to. Grace." Daniel turned to face her, bringing their joined hands up to rest against his heart. "I've spent most of my adult life eating in expensive restaurants with people who saw me as a business opportunity. Tonight I want to order pizza and eat it on your floor, while Lila tells us about her favorite parts of today. That sounds like the best dinner I've had in years." Grace smiled, then the radiant, unguarded expression he'd been hoping to see since their first dinner together. "Pizza on the floor it is, but I get to pay for half." "Deal." The sun was setting behind them as the buses wound their way back through the hills toward Seattle, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that would live in memory long after the photographs faded. In the seat beside him, Grace dozed with her head on his shoulder, while Lila slept across their laps, one small hand still clutching a shell that she'd decided was too special to give back to the ocean. Daniel had spent 2 years believing that his story was over, that the best chapters of his life had ended with Sarah's death, and his role now was simply to be the best single father he could manage. But looking at Grace's peaceful face, feeling Lila's trusting weight against his legs, listening to the quiet breathing of 50 children who'd had the day of their lives, he realized that his story was just beginning. Love, he'd learned, wasn't about finding someone to complete you. It was about finding someone who challenged you to become the person you were meant to be, who saw possibilities you'd never imagined for yourself. Grace had shown him a world beyond boardrooms and business deals, a life built around service and community, and the revolutionary idea that success should be measured in positive impact rather than accumulated wealth. As the buses pulled into Rainbow Bridge's parking lot, and the complex process of reuniting children with families began, Daniel felt a sense of completion that had nothing to do with endings and everything to do with beginnings. Tomorrow, there would be logistics to figure out how 2 people from different worlds could build a life together, how to blend his resources with her principles, how to create a family that honored both Lila's need for stability and Grace's commitment to the children who depended on her. But tonight, there would be pizza on Grace's floor and Lila's stories about shell-finding techniques and the kind of ordinary magic that happened when people chose love over fear. "Daddy," Lila mumbled sleepily as he lifted her from the bus. "This was the best family day ever." "Yes, it was, sweetheart. Can we have more family days with Miss Grace?" Daniel looked at Grace, who was helping Marcus gather his collection of shells and promising his grandmother that all the details of his ocean adventure would be carefully preserved in photographs and stories. "I think we can have as many family days as Miss Grace wants to share with us. Forever and ever. Maybe even longer than that." 3 months later, Daniel Pierce would propose to Grace Moore in the tide pools where they'd first watched Lila discover sea anemones with Marcus and Isabella and David and Sophie and all the children of Rainbow Bridge cheering from the beach. Grace would say yes while crying and laughing simultaneously, and Lila would announce to anyone within hearing distance that she'd known all along this was how the story would end. But on this perfect Friday evening in early spring, as 3 buses full of salt air-scented children and sand-covered adults made their way home through the gathering darkness, Daniel Pierce was content to simply hold his daughter's hand and walk beside the woman who'd taught him that the best view from the top wasn't of the city spread below, but of the faces of people you loved, looking back at you with trust and joy and the absolute certainty that tomorrow would bring new adventures worth sharing. The ocean had told Marcus that he belonged anywhere there was love and people who cared about each other. As Daniel helped Grace load art supplies into her car, while Lila distributed goodbye hugs to every child in sight, he realized that 5-year-old Marcus had become the wisest philosopher he'd ever encountered. They belonged here, all of them, in this imperfect and beautiful constellation of chosen family. And for the first time since Sarah's death, Daniel Pierce believed in forever again.